If I could ask people to take their seats. Thank you, Mr. DeMille. All right. We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. And Tom, since you're up front, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
It'd be my pleasure, Mayor. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Tom. Yvonne, can we please have a roll call?
Yes. Councilmember D'Amico? Yes. Councilmember Horvath?
Here.
Councilmember Meister?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Duran? Mayor Heilman?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, now let's turn to the approval of the agenda. Yvonne, are there any items that staff wishes to continue?
No.
Okay. Council, any changes,
I have a suggestion.
suggestions?
If we can move 4D as in dog, pedestrian safety enhancement to consent, and 5A, housing element annual progress report.
Okay, any objections to moving 4D and 5A to consent? Hearing none, those will be moved to consent.
I'd like to pull item 2N for further discussion, and wanted to see if we might be able to add 4C or 4E to consent.
4C or 4E? I have some comments on 4E.
I have comments on 4C.
Okay, so those will remain on the regular agenda.
Mayor, can we move item 6A, the cannabis amendments, to consent?
I have comments on that as well, I'm sorry.
No worries. How about 4A, the seismic retrofitting item, to consent?
I think we need to have a discussion about that.
All right.
Okay. Well, we tried, but we did move 2 items to consent and we removed 1. So I guess that's a positive change to our agenda in terms of the time. Any other changes? Then I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. We're actually having some problems with the screen right now, so we're going to do a voice vote. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
It's working.
Carried unanimously. I think I heard Mayor Pro Tem say aye. Okay. So we now have an agenda. Now we'll turn to adjournment motions. Lindsay, I believe you have one.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'd like to adjourn in memory of Nancy McFadden, who passed away at the age of 59. She served as Governor Jerry Brown's chief of staff and top aide until January, when she stepped down to undergo cancer treatments. She was critical to many of the key achievements that our governor was able to do, including expanding cap and trade, repairing the state's budget, and approving SB 1, which will fund transportation and road repairs, as we know. Prior to her work in the governor's administration, she served as a senior advisor to former Governor Gray Davis and deputy political director to President Bill Clinton. And she had a genuine passion for inspiring and supporting women in leadership roles, and was instrumental in appointing and empowering women in the Brown administration. So we extend our condolences to her family.
Lindsay, can I interrupt you for 1 second? Yvonne posted that we had pulled 2M, but the correct letter is 2N. So just to clarify that for people. Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry, Lindsay.
That's all right. And I would also like to adjourn in memory of General Grigory Alexandrovich Mazin. General Mazin was one of the oldest World War II Army veterans. In fact, it is believed that he was the last living general from World War II, and he passed away at the age of 103. He entered the Army in 1938 and served as lieutenant colonel and was the chief of staff of the engineering forces to the 69th Army. The general moved to Los Angeles in November 1999 to help his daughter and grandchildren, and was a beloved father, husband, brother, grandfather, and friend to many. He was an active and dedicated member of the Association of Russian Veterans of World War II, and his funeral service took place yesterday, where he was also commended by international leadership for his role in the military and in his service during World War II. So we extend our condolences to his family as well. And as is our tradition, to adjourn our council meetings in honor of military service personnel who were killed in service. They are Captain Christopher Zanettis, age 37, Captain Mark Weber, age 29, Master Sergeant Christopher Raguso, age 39, Master Sergeant William Posh, age 36, Captain Andreas O'Keefe, age 37, Staff Sergeant Carl Enos, age 31, Staff Sergeant Dashin Briggs, age 30, and Master Sergeant Jonathan J. Dunbar, age 36. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Lauren? John? Yeah.
Well, I'd like to adjourn in honor of Alice Handelman. She was the wife of Ira Handelman. Alice and I are friends to me and Keith, and of course all of us here in the community. She was a wonderful wife and mother, struggled with grace and balance for years with liver disease. She died too young and will be missed, and we send all our condolences to Ira and his family. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem? I have two. I would request that we adjourn in memory of Frances Baker. She was the mother of longtime community member Chris Baker. I'd also request that we adjourn in memory of Judge Stephen Reinhardt. He was a stalwart member of the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. He was regarded as one of the most brilliant, influential judges in American history. Many of his decisions were reversed by a conservative Supreme Court, but he continued to labor on for many years. He was really well known for being a bit of a liberal icon and iconoclast on the Court of Appeals. I'd request that we adjourn in his memory. All right, and now we'll turn to presentations. Mayor Pro Tem, you have a presentation tonight.
Yes, I do, Mayor. And just if I take a personal moment first, I want to thank everybody in the community and thank my colleagues on the council for adjourning in my mother's name at the last council meeting. As you all know, my mother was an elected official as well on the east side of Los Angeles, and my mentor and my inspiration. And I've experienced a lot of death and dying over the years, but I have to tell you that this has been, I think, the hardest one. I think losing a parent for just about anybody is the hardest death to experience. But I really want to thank the community for all the support, the flowers that were sent, the text messages, the emails, the hugs, the Facebook messages. Really, people in West Hollywood stepped up and supported my father and my brothers and sister and I, and I just wanted to take a moment of personal privilege to express my deep gratitude to the city of West Hollywood for the support over the last 3 weeks. Thank you. I'm here tonight to make a presentation to Greg Gordon and Lucia Chappelle from This Way Out. This Way Out is the longest-running LGBT radio program that's been in operation for 30 years on KPFK. They've won numerous awards. They've been broadcasting here in Los Angeles, Pacifica radio station, as I said, for 30 years, and they're distributed internationally to 200 local community public radio stations all around the world, throughout Europe, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, Pacifica, Costa Rica, Australia, and so LGBTQ people all over the world rely on this programming, I think, for nourishment and to be kept abreast about what's happening in the movement. And I know I've been a guest on the show a couple of times over the decades, but it's really a great pleasure to present this and to congratulate Greg and Lucia on 30 years of extraordinary work that people all over the world are very grateful for. So thank you to This Way Out.
We want to thank you so very, very much for this honor. You know, when we began our radio show, there were people even in community radio stations who couldn't figure out what we could possibly talk about for a half an hour a week, every week. What could you possibly say about being LGBT for that much time? Well, for 30 years, we found plenty to say. And there's been plenty of incredible things that we never would have dreamed could have happened. And if we've been a little bit of a part of that, if we've been part of inspiring or educating or just giving people some hope, then we can be very proud. Thank you very so much.
Lindsay?
Thank you, Mayor. As I mentioned at our last council meeting, our sheriff's deputies were just returning from the Challenge Cup Baker to Vegas relay, which is a 120-mile race from Baker, California to Las Vegas, Nevada, with over 8,000 runners, guests, family members, and support staff participating every year. The race began in 1985 and is considered the most prestigious and unique law enforcement foot race in the world. It's a positive event that helps law enforcement to maintain a physical fitness program, and the original ideas of the race continue today over 20-plus years after the race began. Teamwork, camaraderie, physical fitness, and competition. This year, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department team brought home third place out of over 275 teams. And this was possible through the hard work of the runners, as well as the follow vehicle teams, catchers, shuttles, and supporters. And it was quite a sight to see. We're very, very proud of our West Hollywood team and congratulate you on your success. Represented here tonight include Deputy Yesenia Olvera, Crime Analyst Brian Hepner, Deputy Chris Lohman, Deputy Gerardo Servin, Sergeant Jeff Bishop, Custody Assistant Christopher Solomon, Deputy Jorge Calvillo, Deputy Danny Martinez, and Captain Sergio Aloma. Congratulations.
Good evening, Council. I just wanted to thank Councilmember Horvath and the rest of Council for recognizing the men and women of the West Hollywood Sheriff Station and their accomplishments at Baker to Vegas. As Councilmember Horvath mentioned, this race started in 1985. I came on the department in 1987 when the race was just about 20 teams, and this past weekend, or a couple weekends ago, there was about 280-plus teams out there, and the men and women representing West Hollywood Sheriff Station certainly did us proud. This race is more than just about running a foot race across the desert, although that's part of it, the competitiveness, but it's also about maintaining and promoting physical fitness in our deputy sheriffs, which I believe, and I'm obviously a huge advocate of physical fitness in our profession, and I think it prepares our folks to better serve our community for sure. Again, I'd like to thank a lot of our local businesses that contributed to helping get 20 runners and about a dozen support personnel out into the desert. It's quite an undertaking. I'd like to recognize Deputy Danny Martinez, who put this whole thing together for us. And as well, thank all the men and women who stayed behind. While we're out having fun in the desert, our deputies were here that weekend. It was the same weekend as the LA Marathon and St. Patty's Day, which was quite the party here in West Hollywood. So we wanted to make sure that our community was safe here at home as well while we were out running through the desert. The race this year was in memory of all the victims of the October 1st shooting in Las Vegas, so we ran in their honor this year. And the men and women of West Hollywood Sheriff Station will continue to stay in shape and continue to run to better serve their community. This coming Sunday, they're participating in the Run to Remember LA down at the Grove. Just a little shameless plug there, Mayor, if you want to come and join us. So again, thank you very much for the recognition. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Captain. Earlier, or actually last month, because we're in April already, about a month ago, the city hosted Homeless Connect Day. As you all know, we have a homeless problem in LA County. There are a lot of people on the street who may not be aware of services that are available. So we hosted Homeless Connect Day, in which more than 60 people who are currently experiencing homelessness were able to connect with a wide array of service providers, including some of the agencies that we contract with. We were very fortunate to have some people from our business community step up and provide assistance. We had several people who provided more than 25 haircuts to people who are experiencing homelessness. And in addition, one of our local businesses donated lunch for everyone participating. So we would like to recognize them for their contributions to making this day a successful day. And I'd like to bring up Jonathan Van Ness, Mark Annewald, and Marion Rogers, who together provided more than 25 haircuts that day. And I'd also like to bring up David Dickerson from Kitchen 24, who donated box lunches for all of the participants. And I'm going to ask my colleague, we're on the homeless committee together, and I'm going to ask Lauren to come and join me. If all of them can come forward, if they're here. There they are. Hiding. Yes.
I just want to say thank you for the recognition, but also just to find where the inspiration for me to volunteer my time comes from in this. And it's about our Sheriff's Department, our citizens of West Hollywood, and the City Council inspire me because I see everybody working so hard in the city and all the volunteers that help with the homeless. And it's them that inspire me to give my time. So thank you to them.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you to all the people that put on that great event. It was pretty incredible to meet and help, and I'm super happy to serve wherever I can. And yeah, I think it's a great thing for the community to pull together. So thank you.
Thank you, Marion. And I want to give a shout out to Marco Pelusi, his salon. The haircuts were all from people who work there, so thank you to Marco. Our last presentation tonight, April is National Poetry Month. And so we have a month-long celebration of poetry and its vital place in American culture. And some of you may not be aware, but the city of West Hollywood has a Poet Laureate program. And in 2016, Kim Dower was inaugurated for a 2-year term as the West Hollywood City Poet Laureate. And as part of her National Poetry Month project, she has created a citywide collaborative poem called West Hollywood is for Dreamers. This is a follow-up to last year's poem, which was I Sing the Body West Hollywood. She has woven together lines that were submitted by approximately 88 members of the West Hollywood community, and she has fused them all together to create this wonderful poem, which I don't think any of us have heard, but if it's as good as it was last year, we know it's going to be spectacular. So I'd like the council to join me as we proclaim National Poetry Month and honor our Poet Laureate, Kim Dower.
Oh, thank you very much. And I love West Hollywood. That's all I can say. You guys do so much for National Poetry Month. Everyone should go outside and see the banners that are hanging all over the city, from here all the way down to Crescent Heights, and different poets with their lines and their faces. And so yes, as I did go all over the city for the last 3 or 4 months collecting lines from people at the yogurt stop and Book Soup and bars and the library and Plummer Park, everywhere. And then I put together this poem. It's all from lines I got from people in the community and in this great city. And this poem is called West Hollywood is for Dreamers. West Hollywood is a rainbow octopus that knows how to sneak out of its tank. A hummingbird beating its wings in our hearts. A chartreuse polka dot gorilla, posh pink poodle in a diamond collar. A lilac cloud filled with electric energy. An eagle, Arabian horse, coyote. She dreamed she saw a ladybug walking a parrot. He dreamed he saw a parade of love on the streets of West Hollywood. West Hollywood vibrates orange, gold, black, white, silver, gray, turquoise, jelly thigh, raccoon's belly, red-crowned rooster, ballerina, rainbow squirrel, chihuahua, collie in ruby heels, kaleidoscope, chameleon changing through the years. She dreamed she saw a princess rescued from a pirate ship. He once saw a chain-smoking angel on the street in West Hollywood. Once he dreamed the world was yellow. He was 1,000,000 miles tall. She dreamed She was in a flock of birds embracing the sky, a ship on the ocean, living in a world without guns. A black jaguar with bright green eyes, decked out in leather and spikes, beautiful by day, fantastic by night. A peacock whose tail unfurled in the light. We once saw a vampire driving a Cadillac on the street in West Hollywood. West Hollywood is a French bulldog on a Broadway stage, a peasant, porn star, panther, Sunset Strip haze, an alien in a red hoodie, three-legged Jabberwocky. She dreamed she was someone else on the street in West Hollywood. He dreamed of a man in a pink tutu riding his bike, saw an orange fox escape out of sight, sperm whale, hysterical giraffe, vermilion cockapoo, fabulous mixed breed rainbow-colored rescue. We see everything on the street in West Hollywood. He dreamed of spearfishing on a reef in Tonga, dreamed he awoke in a car that no one was driving. She dreamed of a rainbow hugging the sky, watched it touch down, melt in her eye. We dreamed we saw a genie granting wishes for those in need. In our city where more life matters, where they say we are dreamers, but we're not the only ones. Look there. It's your soulmate on the street in West Hollywood. So, again, I think you might recognize some of your lines in that. And special thanks to Andrew Campbell and Michael Che for all they do for this project and for me and for Poetry Month. And thank you very much for everything that you guys do.
Thank you, Kim. Wonderful. So that completes our presentations for tonight. Some of you may be wondering why I didn't ask the city attorney to give us a report on the closed session. That's because we didn't have a closed session tonight. We will now turn to public comment. And public comment is a time for comments for items that are on our agenda that have not been pulled for separate discussion or general comments. And Yvonne, I am not getting the list on my screen, so we may have to do this old school. Oh, it's over here. Diane Forte from Southern California Edison, to be followed by Ashley B.
Sign in.
I did.
Thank you very much. We're going to present the same presentation, so she'll come right after me, if that's okay with you.
I can't hear you, Diane, so.
Ashley is going to present half the presentation with me, so it's
Okay.
sort of sequential. So I'm Diane Forte, Government Relations Manager for Southern California Edison. With me tonight, I have Ashley B., who's the project manager for a project on Sunset Boulevard in Tahini. We've been working with staff, and we appreciate the collaboration, but we wanted to come here tonight to make sure council was aware of the project as well. And also at your leisure, when you want to read Clean Power and Electrification Pathway, you can read a little bit of that. It's not poetry, but we think it's rather compelling. So tonight, just want to talk, if you just flip the presentation, page 1, we, Southern California Edison, one of the largest electric utilities in the country, are making significant infrastructure expenditures. And one of the reasons we're doing that is really to keep the grid modern and to allow customers that have a lot of power needs. Everyone's have more charging of phones, more TVs. So we need to meet the future needs of the constituents. This is upgrading new equipment will make the power grid up to date and minimize the likelihood of unanticipated and extended outages. So what is the need for this project? It's on page 4. So we're upgrading cables from 4 kV to 16 kV. That increases the conductor capabilities of electricity, and that's because of the demands and technological advancement. The additional circuits make it easier to restore load if there's an emergency, and then it will just improve overall system reliability. The general boundaries of the project will be Sunset to Melrose, and then North Doheny to North Ogden. We anticipate starting April 5th, and there will be some outages associated with it, and whoever's impacted will get a notification, and that first notification will be April 10th. And those are some of the maps there on page 6 and 7, but that's sort of the broad outline. It's not like everything will be impacted within that. So Ashley will go over the specifics of what will be done when this work occurs.
Good evening. So during construction, we anticipate some minor civil work, but most of the work will be the overhead lines. Our crews will be accessing private property poles during construction. We'll also be having lane closures. We are working with the city staff, and we're going to be using traffic control signs and crews with flags for any detours. We'll also be utilizing cranes to replace some of the more difficult poles. And then also during construction, in order to safely complete this project, we will need to de-energize the power. Residents and customers will be notified 3 to 8 business days prior to the notice, and we are working with city staff on scheduling these outages for the customers. Skipping to the next slide, as far as outage communication, there is an email notice that will be going to city staff for any outages that are occurring in the city. Our Dear Neighbor letters, which serve as a generic upcoming construction notification, were sent out to all affected customers last week. And on the notification, it also has ways for customers to sign up for additional notifications outside of our traditional postcard. Customers can also check the SCE mobile app as well as our website for any outage statuses. And then lastly, for this project, we have a dedicated project line, which I'm fielding any questions that come through. And on this slide, there's also the generic contact information. So if you have any questions that come up, you can reference this information. Do you have any questions regarding the project?
I have a couple of questions. So are you saying you're going to shut down the power for this entire area or portions of it at a time?
It's just portions. We're going to be working in phases. So we're working with the staff to phase these projects out. And it's not going to be outages every day, April through August. It's just a generic time frame and generic map area.
No, I understand it would affect each customer maybe one time, but I'm just wondering the size of it. But I'm actually more concerned about the fact that we have nighttime businesses, and often you schedule your work at night, and we can't really have you shut down the Abbey at 11 p.m. or something like that. So I'm certain you're working with city staff, and it would be better to solve those problems on this side of this discussion rather than on the other side of a decision.
Yeah, so any outages we have, we do submit to the city to get approval first before we schedule anything. And we actually prefer to do the outages during the day. It's a lot safer for our crews, so we definitely work with the staff on any commercial customers and making sure they're not out at night.
Thanks.
Okay, so everyone has heard there's going to be some Edison work being done to improve service, so pay attention to those notices you get in the mail. If you think it's a bill and just throw it away, you may be missing an important notice about your power being shut off for a period of time. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much.
I'm not saying you should throw away your bills, but I find if you pay them, they send you another one the next month. It's amazing how they do that. All right, so our next speaker is Steve Martin, to be followed by Tom DeMille.
Steve Martin, West Hollywood. Sorry to be caught flat-footed.
That's okay. The names aren't up there. So
I was so excited about no closed session. I mean, no one's suing us. That's a reason to be happy. Congratulations. I just want to thank Ms. Horvath on introducing the item 2J about reckless drivers, uninformed drivers, distracted drivers. I'm hoping we can actually do some enforcement, even if we're just sending deputies walking up and down the median strip, people on cell phones, Lyft drivers dropping people off in the middle of Santa Monica Boulevard. None of us want to run over people, but if they're in the middle of the street, in the middle of the night, it's really, really distracting. I also want to request that the mayor send a letter of congratulation to the recently elected president of Costa Rica. I don't know if you were following that election, but President Quesada was running against opponent. His major opponent was a foe of same-gender marriage and ran a rather homophobic campaign. And my thought was, if President Trump can get on the phone to his buddy and hero, Vladimir Putin, and congratulate him, that our mayor could write a letter to Costa Rica congratulating the president of Costa Rica because we share the same community values. And I know John will do a good job. So thank you.
Thank you. Tom DeMille to be followed by Scott Schmidt.
I'm Tom DeMille, City of West Hollywood. You know, I so wanted to be the posh pink poodle with the diamond collar, but unfortunately, I'm just the chain-smoking guy on the angel on the corner. I'm running for City Council on March 5th, 2019, for the 5th time. Every time you knock me down, I just keep getting back up. I've lived with AIDS for 20 years. I went from being the weakest in the community to one of the strongest in the community. I've buried 39 of my neighbors in my house. I've buried 39 people in my house since I dedicated my building, the Screen Actors Guild building on Palm Avenue. I'm so proud to have opened that building in 1998, but unfortunately, I'm very sad to have lost all of those neighbors and friends, as I am to hear the loss of your mom, John. It's the toughest thing that anyone can go through. I see that the Parkway Design Ordinance is on the slip tonight, and let's just go all the way with it. Why are we sticking dogs in a little dog park when we can make the entire city a dog park? You know, with all those parkways, we can put permagrass down. Instead of irrigation, we can put solar lighting. So all of our sidewalks will be lit, so even the blind can see. We have holes in all of our sidewalks, everywhere you go. My campaign is going to be about the residents of West Hollywood. I want to build 100 micro units on Crescent Heights and Santa Monica Boulevard for young artists 18 to 30 years old. I want young people to come to this city. I want them to have an opportunity. When their parents throw them out of their house, I want them to have a place where they're loved, and that's West Hollywood. And again, I'm a different kind of candidate. I'm not going to whore myself out to the developers. I'm not going to take developers' money. I'm just not going to do it. I might not win.
Tom, your time has expired.
Well, I thank you very much for joining me last Saturday. You did a really good job, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott Schmidt to be followed by Amanda Bleich.
Hi, Scott Schmidt, resident of West Hollywood. I'm not running for City Council. So I just wanted to come tonight to give a shout out and a thank you to Oscar and the parking staff. On Saturday, I was on my way to Starbucks and noticed that the parking meters up there were not displaying that it was a holiday. We, for the last 3 years, have honored Cesar Chavez's birthday by making parking free across the city. And it's not something that everyone's aware of, and they were accepting payments. They didn't have the notification like they do for other holidays. So I let them know, and Oscar sent staff out on Saturday morning on a holiday weekend, and so they went above and beyond in the extra mile. So kudos and thank you for that.
Thank you, Scott. And our last speaker is Amanda Bleich.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'll make it very short and sweet. Just wanted to say a few very quick things. As I had mentioned Wednesday night at the Women in Leadership Awards, West Hollywood is a truly magical city and one that I'm so thrilled to live in. Very thankful every single day. The next thing is to really thank Councilmember Meister for her support of the event that we're doing on Friday night, a free screening right here of the film Unlocking the Cage, documenting the Non-Human Rights Project's work. So just to invite everyone to do that, but again, to thank the council member for her continued support of everything. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. That completes public comment, and we'll now turn to council member comments. Council member comments.
Okay, I'll
Councilmember
go
Horvath.
first. Thank you, Mayor. First, congratulations to the Lady Irish. So excited that they won the basketball tournament. They did a great job, and it's exciting to see them be successful. Since our last council meeting, I attended the Beverly Hills City Council reorganization, celebrating Mayor Bossy's year as mayor and welcoming Mayor Gold and Vice Mayor John Mirisch. I assured them that Councilmember Meister and the city would be continuing conversations with them about water, among other things, but it was great to be in attendance. I also gave a presentation to the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce on the Crenshaw Northern Extension progress, and it was great to have their assistance in helping to build our coalition, and going to continue to give presentations to would-be coalition partners to help raise awareness and build our constituency as we're moving forward in our progress with the Northern Extension. I represented the city at the LA County Division of the League on their legislative committee. I also participated in a meeting with Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon regarding the Clean Power Alliance and protection for cities, and requesting his assistance as we move forward with the Clean Power Alliance in Southern California. And also, since the last council meeting, I had the good fortune of being selected as one of 10 young elected officials from throughout the country to represent my city in a delegation that was coordinated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Taiwan to go to Taiwan for a week. And so in addition to learning about their culture and priorities, we had the opportunity to visit the Office of the President and the UN, which is their legislature. We participated in several meetings with ministers and staff of foreign affairs, economic affairs, mainland affairs, and health and welfare. We met with the Taipei Rapid Transit Corporation and Road High Speed Rail, and so we were able to learn about their transportation innovation, and there's certainly some ideas to bring back home in that regard. We also participated in their Smart City Expo, and we visited their high-tech promotion center that is coordinated by the Taipei government. So very interesting to see the innovation that's happening at the local government level in their cities throughout their country. I also toured the Kaohsiung port and visited with their city government officials, where we learned more about their local priorities, including their own aging in place plans. So we were able to swap ideas about things that we can do in our respective communities. We also visited the library there and the Fo Gongshan Buddha Center, and we even got to go to a baseball game on opening day. So it was a very exciting opportunity that I was able to represent our city abroad, to bring our values and talk about our city in a new way. It was interesting to hear, in particular from the Minister of Health and Welfare, that you may know that Taiwan is the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. And they said that in large part that discussion happened around the idea that when they understood that AIDS and HIV was transmitted mostly among gay men who were not with a consistent partner, they started talking about same-sex marriage as a way to help people prevent the spread of HIV and AIDS. And I found that to be interesting, given the way that conversation did and didn't happen in our own country. But they are a very progressive country where written right in the stairs of the Office of the President, it said "power to the people," where they value democracy, freedom, rule of law, and human rights. And so I found it to be pretty impressive, and hopefully there will be opportunities for us to build bridges across the ocean in the other direction.
Councilmember Meister.
Thank you, Mayor. Since our last meeting, I attended a Melrose Action Neighborhood Watch meeting in Poinsettia Park. This is a City of Los Angeles neighborhood watch group. However, they've been working with some of our East Side residents on public safety issues that impact both cities. I also attended the neighborhood watch meeting with our East Side residents at the Gateway, as well as the Ogden Owls neighborhood watch group meeting, where we discussed homeless issues, crime on the East Side, code violations, and the need for traffic calming, permit parking, and the need for beautification of the parkways. Regarding the consent calendar, I was going to talk about 2N, but I will hold off on that. On 4D, the pedestrian safety enhancement on Santa Monica Boulevard at Robertson, I just want to and maybe the city manager can address this, I just wondered if we considered diagonal crossing, and also, regardless of what we do there, since there's going to be changes, if we can have either a traffic cop or a crossing guard stationed for the first few weeks or first month of the pilot project, just to make sure everyone knows what's going on. And then on 5A, which has also been put on consent, that was the Housing Element Annual Progress Report for calendar year 2017. I noticed that we talk about historic buildings and incentives, and I know that that was something that was brought in front of the Historic Preservation Commission as well as the Planning Commission, and that it was supposed to come to council last summer, and it has not come back to us. So I was wondering what the status was of historic building incentives. And then also just a comment that we need to be proactive regarding enforcement of the Mills Act. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember D'Amico.
Thank you, Mayor. Two quick things. The first is I just wanted to really thank, on item 4D, Dimitri and Oscar Delgado for the pedestrian safety enhancement, and my colleague Lindsay Horvath. She and I worked on this, and I think all of us, since we moved it to consent, agree that additional enhancements at Robertson will I think, make a difference and will change behaviors and allow traffic to move, I think, through that area, perhaps a little more freely. So thank you very much, Dimitri. And I also wanted to talk about Grindr. There was some news today about how Grindr had perhaps not purposefully released the HIV status of members who had signed on and declared their status as participants in that app. And other apps have the same opt-in to discuss their HIV status. And I think two things come to mind. The first is that these are international services, and we may have protections here in California or in the United States, but people in other countries who use these apps, certainly many do not. And I think Grindr needs to take a special care for people who use these apps in other places. And I think it would be a good idea for our Lesbian and Gay Advisory Board to invite Grindr to come and discuss that, and invite representatives from other apps as well to come and discuss privacy and how those protections are put in place and what additional protections might be appropriate at this time. I read up on it this afternoon, and Grindr has made the case that there's little risk, but I think we have seen how stigma and the fear that comes with people learning about your HIV status, if you're not telling them, we have 30-some years of history of that in the United States and around the globe, and we certainly don't want to make that any easier. So if the city manager could ask the staff person for the LGAB to agendize that, I would like to attend that discussion and hear what gets said. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few comments. I want to join my colleague, Councilmember D'Amico, in asking us to explore the Grindr issue a little bit more carefully. Grindr was founded by my friend Joel Simke, but as you all know, it was bought out by Chinese investors, and it is a business based here in the city of West Hollywood. And I'm starting to believe that many of the young people who work for the corporation don't understand the history of HIV testing, HIV confidentiality, and privacy that we actually paid for in blood to make sure that people's HIV status was protected. Because not only of the prejudice that occurs and the stigma, as my colleague identified, but the outright discrimination. And while it's true that West Hollywood and the West Side is a lot more progressive, I think anytime you go 20 miles inland from either the East or the West Coast, it gets very threatening very quickly. and don't have to go necessarily to other countries. You can go to places in the interior of California and find still stigma and prejudice against people with HIV. I think the Cambridge Analytica experience that we all just went through shows what happens when these modern-day technologies and applications end up having data and information repackaged and then provided to third parties. And having individuals, not only in this community, but communities around the world, having their HIV status repackaged and then sold, whether to pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, or far more malignant or deviant purposes, is really troubling. I think that when individuals disclose their HIV status on applications like Grindr, they're doing it for purposes of disclosing to others they may have sexual interest in, and not desirous of having that information republished far and wide. And so there are great issues here of privacy and confidentiality that I think need to be protected, and I'm hoping that as a West Hollywood business that primarily serves the gay male community, that Grindr will be interested in having some further discussions with the community about that. I wanted to thank Peter Noonan for item 5A on the housing element. You did a great job. It's going to be on consent tonight, but both Peter and all the housing staff and Aline Winderman before him have worked really hard to make sure West Hollywood has always met our RHNA, our Regional Housing Needs Assessment numbers. But looking at the report, we can see why homelessness is such a problem for Southern California. I hate to fault my colleagues in the city to the east of us, but Los Angeles is behind in production, something like 30,000 housing units, and that's just in the last 4 years. And when you think about the fact that there are possibly 60,000 homeless people in LA County tonight without homes, just think if those 30,000 units had been developed, what a huge chunk that would have been, in the homeless population. So I want to give credit and kudos where it's deserved, and that's to Peter Noonan and all of our housing staff. And of course, our planning staff and others, the Rent Stabilization Commission, who keep us on track in developing low and very low income housing here in the city of West Hollywood. I have an item on the agenda tonight, 2M. The Women's Law Center asked me to co-sponsor an event, an evening with Congressmember Adam Schiff, which will occur here in council chambers on Saturday, April 21st at 3 o'clock. Our Congress member is heralded across the nation as one of the members of Congress that's keeping the current administration in check. And being the minority leader on the House Intelligence Committee, he has a great deal of responsibility for the current investigation being done by Special Prosecutor Mueller, and I'm so proud that he's our congressman. He's our representative, the representative for the city of West Hollywood. And so I hope that many of you will come out to hear our member of Congress, and if nothing else, to thank him for the incredible work that he's doing in Washington, D.C. on our behalf, and I think on behalf of all the people of the United States. This Wednesday at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, I will be, along with the Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles, participating in the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King. April the 4th is the 50-year anniversary of that assassination that happened in Tennessee. The Gay Men's Chorus was approached by the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and asked to perform with the black churches. If you know your history, you know that here in Los Angeles County on Proposition 8, we did not fare well in the black community in terms of the relationship between the black community and the LGBT community on marriage equality. So fast forward 10 years from that election in 2008 to 2018, and we now have the black churches and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference extending a handout to our LGBT chorus, and gay male chorus, gay men's chorus, and asking them to perform the 7 last words of the unarmed, which is a piece written about the police violence against members of the black community, along with other songs and tributes to Martin Luther King Jr. It's at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. It's free to the public. We anticipate we'll have people from all various communities across greater Southern California attending, and people from the city of West Hollywood, of course, are welcome to attend, and I hope you'll think about doing it as we all pay tribute to one of the greatest civil rights leaders of the last century. And finally, my last announcement is on April the 12th in Plummer Park is our annual Yom HaShoah event to remember the Holocaust and to remember the victims of the Holocaust. While it's a very sad and often solemn event, it's a very necessary event, especially in this day of Holocaust deniers around the world that are trying to suggest that it did not occur. It's important that we always remember, and that will be on April the 12th at Plummer Park at 4 p.m. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. My comments are fairly brief tonight. Lindsay, welcome home. John, welcome back. We're glad to have you here. I did have a meeting after the last council meeting. Both Councilmember Meister and I met with two members of the Beverly Hills City Council in our continuing discussion of water rates with them. I also want to let people know that about a month ago, there were a number of people who live near La Cienega in the West Hollywood West area who are very concerned about a proposed development in the city of Los Angeles. We have hired an attorney to help us represent the interests of the city. The attorney will be meeting with homeowners in the West Hollywood West area who are most impacted by the proposed development, and I believe that meeting is happening next week. So I just wanted to let people know that we will be following up on that. And thank you, Mr. Martin, for the suggestion. We will send a congratulatory letter to the President of Costa Rica, the President-elect. That completes my comments. We'll now turn to the City Manager's report.
Great. Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm going to quickly try to address a number of items that were raised tonight by the council. Then I do have some additional information to provide. In regards to the crosswalk at Robertson and Santa Monica Boulevard, staff and the engineers did study the possibility of doing a scatter crosswalk. I personally really like the scatter crosswalks. They're great for pedestrian areas. However, Robertson's traffic during the day, it's much more vehicular. The nighttime patterns are more pedestrian, and the system that we're creating accommodates both. It accommodates the through traffic with vehicles during the day, and it will also accommodate the pedestrian traffic during the nights. And we will have staff out helping people understand the crosswalks once that system goes into place. The incentives for historical multifamily buildings is scheduled tentatively to come to the council in June, so the council will have an update and opportunity to discuss that at that time. While we were listening to council member comments, staff was emailing me and emailing the staff that coordinates the LGAB meetings, so they will be agendizing an item to discuss the grinder policy issue. They're looking at, as of now, a meeting in May. That may be a conflict with some of the council members' schedules, because I know some of you are traveling, so we'll make sure that we coordinate it when, if any of you want to attend, you can attend that. Other items to report on, I'm going to try to do 2 items on Sunset Boulevard, and if I mess them up, the city attorney can correct me. 8500 Sunset, I was asked to provide an update on what's happening with the AKA extended use. As the council knows, but maybe the community doesn't know, we did an administrative ruling and interpretation that the use to do the extended stay executive housing was a code violation. AKA has appealed that decision. The decision has gone to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission requested that it be continued, so it will come back to the Planning Commission at the April 19th meeting. Also, I was asked, or the city attorney was asked, one of us was asked to give a brief update on 8150 Sunset. This is the project outside the city's border on the corner of Crescent Heights and Sunset Boulevard. They recently won a court ruling which allows them to proceed with the development with some minor changes. What's important to us is that the deal, the negotiation that we made with them is still in effect, and the public benefits to the city will be part of that deliverable from that developer. There was a number of emails that were sent this weekend to the council and from community members, both in favor and critical of the Lime scooters that suddenly appeared over the weekend on our city's public right-of-way. City's code compliance worked with the vendor to have them removed from the city, and they're now no longer on the public right-of-way. Our mobility folks are going to continue to dialogue with them. If there is any sort of discussion or any sort of formal proposal, that would come back to council after being vetted. But as of now, they have been removed from the public right-of-way. So I'm going through a lot of things. Does the council have any questions, or you want me to just keep rolling?
Going.
Okay.
I just want to say that get the LGAB meeting in April, have this conversation. There's a whole month between now and May.
Whatever we can do.
Great.
Yeah, we're definitely, unless there's something else on there. We'll make this a priority. The facilities department informed me that they're going to be doing work on Melrose between La Cienega and Doheny between April 9th and 13th during daytime hours at nighttime hours, 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. They'll be restriping and refinishing markings on the boulevard. Also, April 9th to 20th, the Rosewood Traffic Circle, the landscaping is going to be improved and replaced with a new groundwater system. There's a number of other items that are listed here that are not as critical. However, Recreation does have an event April 7th from 10:30 a.m. to 1:30 a.m. It's Let's Play Ball at West Hollywood Park. It's a first pitch that starts at 10:45. Engineering is also doing a number of sidewalk repair projects that will commence later this month, and impacted residents will receive a notice 2 weeks in advance. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for our city manager?
The halftime score is Villanova 37, Michigan 28.
And he has Villanova in his bracket. I know that. All right. Thank you, Paul. That completes our city manager's report, so we will now turn to our consent calendar, which is a series of routine items that we approve with a single motion. Yvonne, what is the fiscal impact of the consent calendar as it's been amended?
The fiscal impact with the addition of items 4D and 5A and the removal of item 2N is $569,000 in expenditures, $0 in potential revenue, and $5,532 in waived fees.
Move the item.
It's been moved, and is there a second?
Been seconded.
Okay, and it's not coming up on our screen?
It's coming up on mine.
It's coming up on your screen, but not mine. All right. Oh, here it's coming up. Mine is, like me, slow tonight. Okay. Has everyone voted? Yes, now it's coming up. It passes. The consent calendar is approved. So if you were here for a consent calendar item, it's been approved. You can go home and celebrate. Now we will turn to our first item of unfinished business, which is item 4A, an update on the mandatory seismic retrofitting and exploration of cost pass-through for rent-stabilized tenants and landlords. Who's giving the report tonight?
I am. Good evening.
Thank you, Peter.
We do have a presentation, or we could just go into questions.
Council, are you prepared to just go into questions? Yes. Okay. Who wants to start?
Do you want to take the...
Oh, well, we do have one public speaker, Amanda Smash Hyde. Amanda Hyde. Okay, there she is. I see her running in. I'm sorry, I caught you unawares.
Good evening, everyone. Amanda Smash Hyde, renter and business owner in the city of West Hollywood. I am actually, I don't even know where to begin when it comes to this. I don't know anything else in this world where you buy something, it's your investment, and then somebody else has to pay for it. Could you let me know about that? Basically, as a renter, there are a lot of pros and there are a lot of cons, but one of those pros is that maintenance isn't really your issue. You ask the landlord and they fix it. And when you rent a place and you move into that place, it's under the assumption that you're safe. And that responsibility is upon the landlord. Like, I have to pay for my own insurance for my own items internally. I don't understand why the cost of them maintaining for earthquake retrofitting would go on to renters. That just is nonsensical to me. I mean, if you want me to pay for it, I would love a portion of the proceeds of what you're making from things. That would be glorious. Because if you sell the property, I get nothing. There is nothing in there that goes to me in any capacity. It just doesn't make any sense to me, nor does it make sense to our renters. And furthermore, I don't feel bad for the landlords. Like, you get to raise rents, and maybe because of rent control, you don't get to raise them as much as you once would, but you still are making money. There is no doubt in this land that you are making money and that you can lend off that money and that that is all there for you. It's just one of those things that this shouldn't be passed on to our renters. This could seriously affect people's ability to afford to live there. And most of the community doesn't even know this is happening. When I went out and talked to people, they were like, what? They just don't know. So honestly, this is something that I really don't think that this should be passed on to the renters. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yvonne, do we have another speaker on this item? Larry Block. Thank you.
Hi, Larry Block, West Hollywood. A landlord gets to go take out a loan from the bank and write off all these expenses. There should not be any cost to a tenant. And also, as far as keeping some of these buildings secret from a tenant and not exposing all the buildings that need this retrofit, I think it's up to they should be public knowledge, it should be released so that all tenants know if their building is in jeopardy, and perhaps they have to be relocated at the cost to the landlord if the building is not safe. But every person in the city has a right to see that report as to which buildings and which are in jeopardy. Thanks.
Thank you. Wesley Bridle. Why'd you walk all the way back?
Council members, Mayor, thank you so much. I just want to say that I do not feel, in my personal opinion, that renters should have to pay for the equity of landlords. They have no right. We pay our rent every month. There are walls that haven't been painted. The outside of our buildings haven't been painted, but now we're supposed to pay for retrofitting, and I think that's wrong. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Council questions? Am I the only one who has questions?
I have one question. The issue regarding publication of addresses and whether they might be subject to retrofitting requirements. There was a question in the public about when that list might be made available to the community. I think it's important that people are aware and are participating in the conversation for a variety of reasons, but they should certainly know if they're going to be impacted. So if you could talk about your decision thus far, when people will expect to have that list of addresses disclosed.
Sure, thank you. John Kehoe, Interim Director for Planning and Development Services. So we have made a lot of progress over the last several months on completing and moving forward our seismic project. And so one of the things that we're able to do now is we're ready and available to release the list by the end of next week, the list of properties that are on the list that have been surveyed. We will have additional staffing also available following that will be able to answer questions and concerns by building owners, so we feel comfortable at this time.
So you're going to release the list starting next week?
At the end of next week.
Okay. And let me ask you, is it, the list, as I understand, is not necessarily completely accurate. It may include some buildings that aren't subject to the retrofitting, and we may be missing some. This is just based on sort of a windshield drive-by survey, correct?
So this is a list that our consultants came up with their drive-by, looking at all the properties. They looked at all the properties in the city of West Hollywood. So they looked at all the properties. They looked at records indicating what type of building those were, what type of buildings they were, and what years they were built. And so they looked at all those buildings, and then based on the ordinance that the city council approved, then they created a list of all properties that look like they fall into those categories. So again, this is a list of properties that look like they fall into this category, but this list does not mean that they are hazardous buildings or that they haven't even already had some sort of seismic retrofit in the past. So there's ways for people to continue to look through the list, and the buildings may or may not ultimately need additional work.
So we will, at some point, I'm assuming, notify these building owners that we believe your building is one of the ones that needs to be retrofitted, and then that would give the building owner an opportunity to come into the city and show that it's already been retrofitted, or to show that they are actually outside of the definitions in the ordinance.
That's correct.
Okay, great.
And to be clear, the releasing of the list does not start that process.
Correct.
That process is going to be a separate certified mail process that would go to the individual property owners.
Correct. The process to begin the compliance with the ordinance starts when a property owner receives a letter from the city. So releasing the list is just releasing the list. It doesn't start the clock for compliance with the ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
Lauren.
that was one of my questions. So, and a certified letter will go out.
Correct.
And that's when that clock will start. So in terms of the report then, on page 5, it has list of properties potentially affected. So that is now, we've moved that, right? We've moved that to when you're going to be starting community outreach. We've moved it back or forward. Right?
I think you're
Okay.
talking about the list of properties
potentially
in the
affected.
chart on page 5. Instead of scheduled for release once all program components are in place, you're saying this will be released next week.
Correct.
Okay, great. And then I just wanted, I think maybe it would be helpful to the public if you Peter explained NOI, what landlords are permitted to pass through at this, currently, just to sort of explain that process.
Yeah, I have a slide, actually, and I think that this would be helpful for the public. As we have had a number of meetings earlier this year. We had 2 focused stakeholder meetings, and then we shared this information at 7 other events that we held, both our housing conversations and our rent stabilization seminars. So we will be going out with more community meetings and mailings to all rent stabilized tenants and landlords. Importantly to know, currently the city has a rent adjustment process, and so if a landlord is not earning an NOI, a net operating income off of the building, they can request a rent increase. And the rent increase is permanent. It cannot be capped. There's no hardship exemption. The thing is that a landlord must justify it. So they have to justify that they need it. And I think that some of the speakers tonight pointed out a fact that Costa-Hawkins has allowed landlords to increase rents. And so therefore in buildings that have newer rents, there is most likely not a chance of taking that pass-through. But in buildings where you have longer-term tenants, there is more of a question of whether they could receive a rent increase or not. Now, in contrast, a pass-through, which the Rent Stabilization Commission is looking at as well, that's in place in LA and in San Francisco, it's a surcharge, and so it's not rent. It's time-limited. It can be capped, and in LA it's capped at $38 a month per unit. It's capped at $30 or 10% of the rent in San Francisco. There is a possible hardship exemption. Berkeley has that in place on theirs. The landlord does not need to justify it. They simply are allowed to pass that through. So we've been providing this information to the public, and it seems, although we've had lower attendance than we've wanted at our stakeholder meetings and other meetings, that people are understanding the need for seismically retrofitting their buildings. And they're also seeing the need to balance that desire from the landlords to retrofit their buildings with the need to cover some of the costs. Something else that's been at play that we've heard is that tenants are concerned about a rent increase. And so I can show you here, just as an example of we ran some scenarios. Like I said, buildings with high rents, you'll see at the bottom there, there's most likely no chance of passing through those costs to the tenants. But look at the buildings with the lower rents. And these are buildings per se that would be housed by folks that are mainly moved in prior to Costa-Hawkins. You could potentially see rent increases, and under our current system, they are considered part of the rent. It's included in the maximum allowable rent. It's adjusted and increased per year, and we can't establish a hardship exemption for those tenants. The difference is that we can do that for the pass-through, and as I mentioned, the pass-throughs are in LA is 38, in San Francisco it's 30 right now. So why I'm providing all this information is that I'm hoping that folks in the attendance here tonight will come out and join us at these meetings and be a part of the conversation and the dialogue going forward, because I think it's important that the community engage on this. It's a very important part of our rent stabilization ordinance. We do need to upgrade and maintain our buildings and ensure that they're seismically retrofit and safe, because if we do have a major earthquake and we do lose those buildings, we cannot reclaim rent stabilization.
And then just one more question. So now San Francisco is passing through 100% over 20 years. LA is passing through 50% over 10 years. I mean, but we have a choice. We can say 35% over 15 years, or that's a decision that we'll be asked to make after it comes back to us after rent stabilization.
That is correct. We're anticipating that this will come back for discussion in front of the council in July after coming to the Rent Stabilization Commission 3 times between now and then. And this is all part of the flexibility. Like you said, one has 50%, one has 100%. There's nothing in stone that says that you have to choose one or the other. We could be somewhere in between. We could also, the council also has the option of staying with the rent adjustment that we have on the books now. So I don't think that there's any decisions that have been made now. We are going out to the community, and we do want to hear from the community.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Duran.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, thank you to my colleague Lauren Meister and Peter Noonan for that exchange, because they hit a lot of the points I wanted to raise. But I just want to add to what's already been said. There are political considerations that we have to make in balancing the cost share between landlords and tenants, but there are also legal considerations as well. When a city mandates that something be done, it can't be done in such a way that it results in a taking away of a landlord's property rights. That would be an overreach on behalf of a local government, violation of due process, and runs the risk of actually having parts of the ordinance struck down if there are legal challenges. So we also have to place this within some legal analysis. And this is not maintenance. Maintenance is something that's done monthly or annually or biannually to help upkeep a building. These are capital improvements. This is $40,000, $150,000. And at the end of the day, you have to imagine, we haven't had a major quake now in 24 years. We are so due. We are overdue for a major earthquake. And 78% of our residents are renters. And if a major quake was to hit, any of those buildings that would have to be red tagged because they were so destroyed, those buildings end up getting demolished completely, as Peter Noonan just said. So as a municipality, as a local government, we have a responsibility to do what we can to preserve our rent-controlled housing. And it does mean having to pass this ordinance, figure out an appropriate formula for a share of cost, so that if and when the big one hits, we don't end up losing a lot of rent-controlled housing by demolition and red tagging. Because whatever gets replaced would not be rent-controlled. And those of us that enjoy rent-controlled apartments, if the building is so significantly damaged by a big quake, we are not going to find a $1,300, $1,500, $1,700 apartment in West Hollywood again, and would be forced to leave the city. So it's really critical that we go through this process and we figure out a way to do it in a way that's just And if there are individuals who are having a tough time making ends meet, low income, disability, seniors, the aged, we have waivers as part of the formula to make sure that nobody is harmed or forced to bear a cost that they cannot bear. So this has been going on now for a couple of years, and I'm sorry to hear some people haven't heard about it. We've been debating this, but as we continue to go through the process, we're still in it. We're still in it. I hope people will keep in mind what the end game is. The end game is to preserve as much of our city's rent-controlled properties as we can and to not lose them to destruction or demolition. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Horvath.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we have been having this conversation for a couple of years, and I also want to thank Mayor Pro Tem Duran for highlighting this issue. Obviously, as more knowledge has come forward and more studies have been done about the impacts of earthquakes on buildings and how seismic retrofitting can help in a preventative way, that it is good for us to be having that conversation here. I'm glad that we have taken action to give direction on protecting our most at-risk buildings. But I would also say that for buildings that are not on the city's list, it's still a wise idea to do your due diligence, so you know what your options are should the big one hit. I think there are reasons why the city has given direction on the ordinance as we have, and we don't need to rehash all of that tonight. But I do think that safety is the #1 issue, and that's why we're having this conversation. I think it's important to share information that we're learning through our experts and consultants, and I want to thank our staff for working on this to make that information available. But there were also questions that came up along the way about misinformation that was coming out as a result of that process. So while I think it's been frustrating for people who wanted to get more information about their particular building or address, I'm glad that we're at least putting forward some effort to make sure that the list that comes forward has been vetted to some degree. And while I understand that it is a preliminary list, that we're making sure that as much information out there is as accurate as possible. But I agree with the sentiments that were expressed tonight about the pass-through costs to tenants. I don't support the recommendations that are before us tonight. I don't think these costs should be passed through to renters, and so I will be voting no tonight on this.
Thank you. Councilmember D'Amico.
Well, now I'm super confused because we're not passing through costs with this item, right?
There are no recommendations that we're approving tonight other than to receive and file and to direct staff to continue doing what they're doing, which is exploring all possible options and having continued community meetings.
Great. So I have three what I hope will be well-heard points about three really potentially insignificant things. But the language we've been using about this number of buildings changed this evening. It was that there were 740 buildings, and then somehow this evening that line disappeared. It might be more, it might be fewer. So I'm sort of confused. I mean, do we know the universe of buildings that need to respond and that we plan to send letters to, or are we just sending a letter to every multifamily building?
No, we're not sending them to every multifamily building. We're sending to a very specific list of addresses. So it's 740 buildings are subject to the soft story ordinance. So you may remember we talked about it in two parts. So there's one meeting that was talking about 740 soft story, and there are 80 buildings that are subject to non-ductile concrete or pre-Northridge steel moment frames. There's two categories. We adopted them two ordinances.
So if you don't receive a letter, I mean, you can check your own building if you want, but you don't have to respond. You're not under any obligation to engage with the city about the seismic status of your building.
Correct.
Okay, good. All right. So that's, and then I just have a suggestion about the rollout. I think it's good that we're releasing this information, especially since the program is beginning. But I just might suggest that maybe you do it in some kind of incremental way, that maybe you release the 80 buildings that fall into the category of non-ductile concrete and pre-Northridge steel, and you then 2 weeks later release maybe the buildings east of La Brea, and then 2 weeks later the buildings, east of Fairfax to La Brea, and then, west of Fairfax to Doheny. I just think that getting phone calls from a universe that includes 850 people who will be confused, you just might want to give yourself some time to get that going. So I'm agnostic about whether you do that, but I'm glad that we're doing it, and I just would hate for us to create a frustrating experience for people when they're trying to call City Hall because 700 of their neighbors are also calling. Because not only will tenants call, but landlords will call, and buildings buildings next door to that building, is it going to fall on me? People who park in front of that building are going to want to know, that sort of thing. So I just really would offer that customer service has to be a part of this. And then I guess the third point, and this is about Kaiser Marston's work, which, again, it's really the only thing I've asked about this since you started this, and it's that you evaluate this on $1 per square foot of construction, because, and setting that as a cap. And Kaiser Marston said, it's not reasonable to do that, but I would tell you that in the real world, and they work in the world of examples and hopefulness, but in the real world, a building owner and a developer will know the cost per square foot of what they're planning to do. And I think we could ask Dan Adams to come and set a maximum cost per square foot for soft story construction and a maximum cost per square foot for ductile construction. And I think that gets to Amanda and some of the other people from the public's concern that we've said in this example that at $104,000, you don't get money if you have this much income, you do get money if you have that much income, and so on. Well, a contractor will just submit a bill for $204,000 at 100% more than the actual cost. And yes, I'm certain you will do all the investigation and not be able to prove that they're lying, because they'll figure it out and they'll try to pass on these costs. So if we set the cost per square foot, whatever they have to pay will be of no interest to us. So I'm just not clear why that has never been something we have investigated in this effort, because this effort, I think, is we're opening up our tenants to a lot of exposure. And, yes, they can process an application and we have to accept it and we have to review it, and we'll really go after making sure it's the right information, but we'll never be able to say that it's not the right information, because we don't require that they submit payment records to their workers. We don't require that they submit the costs of materials. We don't require that they tell us how much they paid for consulting. All we will ask for is the cost of the retrofit. And if they know that they have to prove that it costs more than the income they get, then that's what they'll do. So I'm just going to, I promise you I will not ask for this again, but if it's not included in the ordinance that we bring forward, I can't support it, because suggesting that we can't set a maximum price per square foot means we're not thinking this through from the point of view of the tenant. And I think, as my colleagues have said, we really, really have to do that. So I'm encouraged that we're moving forward with this. I know it's tricky, and Peter and John and the consultants that you hired that did the seismic review, the windshield study, you've been very, very careful, and I want to thank you, and I'm just glad that we're moving forward, and I hope that we can think about customer service as we roll this information out, and think about the tenants as we think about the backside of the completion of this work. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Meister.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. On attachment A, page 5, there's a table that has estimated retrofitting costs per square foot of building area. Is that what you're looking for?
Not quite.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe that, tell me if I'm wrong, I understood this to be that we would set a maximum cost of retrofitting rather than what's on page 5 in this table, which is an estimation of potential costs.
Perhaps one of the things we could do is set a maximum in terms of the amount that could be passed through. So if the landlord wanted to spend more than the estimated cost, that amount would not be considered for any pass-through if we eventually adopt a pass-through program. So I think, first of all, most of our buildings are actually safe. They've withstood earthquakes. People shouldn't be worried that their building is suddenly going to collapse tomorrow. But the idea behind this program is to try to increase the safety, the seismic safety of our buildings, and with a particular focus on our apartment dwellings. Part of that has to do with trying to preserve as much of our rent-controlled housing stock as possible. I am a little concerned that we will be preserving it in some respects from earthquakes, but we won't be preserving the affordable aspect of it if we're then allowing, significant pass-throughs to the tenants. And I do understand the sentiment that, why am I paying for it as a tenant when this building and all of the improvements will belong to the landlord forever? And I get that sentiment, but I also understand that the current tenants do benefit because landlords might very well decide, earthquake retrofitting is going to cost too much. I'll just go out of the rental business. I'll sell this to a developer and allow him to demolish it and put up something else. We also have to worry about the fact that if this retrofitting doesn't take place and there is significant earthquake damage, those units may not be rentable in the future. So I understand why you're exploring some kind of mechanism where both the landlord and tenant share. I do second the sentiment that it shouldn't be the full cost that is shared by or that is passed through, because this benefits the landlord as well. Their investment, their property is protected, and they will have that long after the tenant is gone. Being in a condo, I understand this because sometimes condos have special assessments, and you end up paying for several years, and when you move, you're not going to really see the benefit of that. Maybe you see it in an increased sales price, but you may be ending up paying for improvements that benefit the future occupants of the property. I guess part of my thought here is maybe there's a way for a partial pass-through, and maybe there's also an opportunity for us to look for some kind of preservation easement as well, meaning that in exchange for allowing some of this to be passed through to the tenants, the landlord has to agree that the property will be preserved as rental housing for a certain period of time. I know that gets into the Ellis Act, but if we're providing them with some additional benefit for passing through, I think we should be allowed. Or maybe we ask the legislature to allow an owner to agree to preserve it as rental housing for, the life of whatever the improvement is, in exchange for us allowing some pass-through. So I'd like that to be explored as well. Okay, do you need further input from us? I think you were just bringing this really as an update and to get a sense of the council. We may not all be in agreement, but you got enough feedback tonight?
Yes, thank you.
One quick.
Yeah.
Will you be looking at financing when you bring it back to us? Because something you might want to consider looking at is our housing trust fund, either with grants or no-cost loans.
Okay.
The city of Santa Monica opted not to do a pass-through to tenants when, even though they implemented a seismic retrofitting ordinance. So I'm voting no because I don't want to explore this option. I'm aware that we're not voting on the ultimate decision tonight. I just don't want to explore that. But if you're doing other research, you might want to explore why Santa Monica opted not to do a pass-through. No, it's not a receive and file. There are two recommendations.
So can you do research about Santa Monica, their experience, what their decision-making was, as well as, you know, have they begun the implementation, and what is the impact that is occurring there?
I can be happy to do that.
Okay. Was there something else you wanted to add, Peter?
I could share most of that information tonight if you wanted it now.
No, I think we're ready to move on with this, but you'll bring it back to us. So there is a recommendation before us, which is to receive the update, direct staff to continue exploring this option, which I understand Lindsay doesn't want us to do, and also direct the Rent Stabilization Commission to continue its analysis. Okay? So there's a motion and a second. All those in favor, please indicate by pushing your yes, and it does get approved 4-1. Thank you, everyone. We will now turn to item 4B, Transportation Demand Management Ordinance, and I believe Tiffany is here, and Bianca is coming forward. I don't see Bob. Oh, there's Bob. He's sneaking up from behind. Staff, or council rather, do we need a staff report on this item? No, we have two public speakers. Why don't we take the two public speakers and then we'll turn to council comments and questions. Scott Schmidt is our first speaker, to be followed by Genevieve Morel.
Hi again, Scott Schmidt, resident of West Hollywood. This is a good intention to update, and certainly anything that we can do to mitigate the impacts of people coming to and from work in West Hollywood, you know, even if it's a drop in the bucket, is worthwhile. I have two concerns, though, about the sort of where this is coming from. First, I don't think it's possible for a business to get to 20 points if it's someplace that doesn't have a setback or a parking lot, if they don't own their own parking, if they're in a historic building. You know, I've been trying to get to 20 points, and it's just not possible for many of them. And then the second is, what do we consider an employee? I don't know that that's well defined. A lot of businesses have independent contractors and other folks that come and go. So those need some clarification, and you know, we need to make it more feasible. And even if you were to get to 20 points, it might cost a business like the Abbey $1 million a year, which seems like a really large unfunded mandate. Some ideas I had, let's look at maybe focusing on when the employees are coming and going rather than the total number of employees. Someone who arrives at work at 9 p.m. and leaves at 4 a.m. isn't having as much traffic impacts as someone who you know, works banker's hours. So perhaps we focus on the employee trips rather than the employees themselves, or the peak hour employee trips. Or if there's an alternative schedule, you know, each employee that has an alternative schedule, maybe the business that gets a point or something. So those are some concerns and some ideas to maybe make this work a little bit better and be less onerous and costly to local businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Genevieve?
Hi, good evening, Mayor and council members. Genevieve Morrill, President and CEO of the West Hollywood Chamber of Commerce. I do want to thank staff. They've been really working hard on this, on what their direction was, and we just think that we really need more time and more work on this, particularly more data. You know, we're just not there yet. I get it, getting cars off the road, but when you take this sort of issue, and somebody described it this way, that you have all this pass-through traffic, and then you take that out of the equation, and then it gets a little less, and then you take residents out of the equation, it gets a little less. And you're dealing with 30,000 employees without data of who's traveling, in a car or bus, what kind of hours they're working, et cetera. I think the point system, if we start to try to get into point systems, this and that, it gets very convoluted. And I really think that we have ignored the educational component of this right off the out of the gate. One of the TDM meetings that I went to, the consultant basically said, education doesn't work. And I don't feel we've tried that. We had an existing ordinance on the book that some businesses didn't even know we had. And if we look at the research here, based on 41 key, we're using key takeaways from 41 employees out of almost 30,000 employees. 1/4 of the respondents do not think that their employer offers any commute programs. That's 10 employees out of 30,000 in the city that don't know their employers do that. While we sat in one of the TDM focus groups, one of the employers, a hotel, said, well, we do this already. And people didn't know that. They already did that. They already provided bus passes. They already did a lot of this. I think this requires a lot more, and I'd love to really help with this, not just send it out once as a blast to respond to a survey, but really work on getting data and samplings that will help to advise this program. Because getting the cars off the road is a good thing. But I think that this program is taking not the whole picture, but a very small component of employees, which are a very small piece of this. If 26% of our
Your
employees
time
are
has
hospitality,
expired.
26% hospitality, they work off hours and
Thank you.
staggered
Your
hours.
time has expired. All right. Council comments? Can we get the vet to shut up? Yeah. All right. Council comments.
I'll move the item and make a quick comment. I want to thank staff for all their work on this so far. We had a conversation earlier this afternoon, and I heard Ms. Morrell's comments regarding impact on small businesses. And I'll just remind everybody, we're only at the halfway point. This is still a work in progress. We're not passing anything tonight that's set in stone, but we obviously need to work on the issue. I think one of the unique challenges to Los Angeles County is we're a county with 88 municipalities contained within it, everybody with their own ideas on traffic. And unlike San Francisco, which is both a city and county in the same place, where they can more effectively manage their strategies, or places like New York, where we have a vertical city as opposed to a horizontal city, that Southern Californians were uniquely challenged. And our little 1.9 square miles of heaven is, right in the center of a heavily trafficked east-west corridor between Hollywood and the west side. So are we going to be able to solve all the traffic congestion problems of the west side and West Hollywood with this or any item? No, we're not. But I think we should be continuously in the process of educating employers and residents and others about transportation alternatives, and just having the conversation and putting some staff time and resources towards it at least gets people to start to think about innovation and different strategies, and rather than most of us being driving alone in our vehicles, look at other alternatives. So I think it's a step in the right direction, and we're still going through the process, and I hope we continue to do this. So I'll move the item.
Councilmember Meister.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a lot of concerns about this draft framework. And first of all, we're talking about up to a third of the commuters that are actually working in West Hollywood, once you take out the 27% that are coming from outside this, the 8% that are commuting within, and then you have the 27% that are coming from outside. So that comprises about a third of those commuters. 39% of them are just passing through, which we don't have control over. 26% are leaving West Hollywood, so those people are not employed in West Hollywood, so we have no control over them in terms of employer mandates. Although maybe we would have, this TDM ordinance should actually include all of these commuters as opposed to just focusing on the employers in the city. My concern is that we have 57% of our businesses we have 26% that are accommodation and food services, 16% that are retail trade, 15% that are healthcare. These aren't 9-to-5ers. They can't telecommute, which was one of the, ideas that in the report, because obviously if you work in a hotel or a restaurant, you need to be there. Those types of businesses really can't have on-site daycare, at least not the food services or the bars, because you can't have alcohol being sold near a daycare. And then we have to think about the cannabis businesses that are going to be opening up. The transit subsidies that are being mentioned are also sound expensive. I calculated, I had asked staff to tell me what the city is doing, and it looks like the city is paying something like $500 per employee to have 58 employees participate in the incentive program. So the incentive really is, it's a big cost for a small business. Also, the idea about the ground floor activation, I think that's great. I think that should be included in all of our mixed-use projects. So I think that's great. But again, that's really about new development. And I do think that we have to look at new development in regards to this, but it doesn't really apply to the small businesses that exist or would be going into those developments. I'm also very concerned that we haven't done a traffic impact fee nexus study since 1989. And so we haven't really looked at the effects of new development on our cities, the impact on congestion, et cetera, for a very long time. And as we all know, development has changed quite a bit since 1989, since there are a lot, we're giving mixed-use bonuses and this bonus and that bonus. Projects are a lot larger than they would have been back in 1989 when we probably stuck more to our zoning. So I have concerns. I do think we should continue looking at this, but I do think that we need to be looking, maybe we should be looking at, again, I think what Genevieve brought up about the education side of it, the basic category that you have in the report. I think that maybe we should be looking at a pilot program with some of our larger companies that are in the city. We do have, even though they may only be a couple of % of our business with 200 plus employees or 100 plus employees, there's still thousands of employees, and we could be doing a pilot program to see how that would, how all of this would work. And I think with our smaller businesses, again, we can't just look at it by number of employees or size. We have to look at it by category, because again, restaurants and bars, they're not going to fit into this format. Also, with regard to the Nexus study, I do think that we should be offering options. I don't know that we can necessarily change the behavior of our employees or even our residents unless we have options. And I think that's why it's so important that we do the Nexus study to see if we're not really getting the amount of money from these new developments that we should be getting, so that we can offer more City Line X buses or City Line during the day or the shuttles at night. And I do have a problem with having someone, an organization outside of the city doing enforcement. I think spending $200,000 a year on that, I couldn't support that.
Councilmember Horvath.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to second the Mayor Pro Tem's motion. I think what we're doing tonight is giving direction to fully develop the TDM ordinance for us to come back and fully evaluate. I hear the concerns of the business community, and it sounds like they're engaged with you, so please continue to engage them and work with them on the issues that they've raised. I think their concerns were really about small business, so for talking about a pilot program, it seems to me a small business pilot would be more useful than a large business one. But overall, this effort is required by state law, as I understand it. Is that right? So we have to do it. We have to just make sure that our approach is one that isn't one size fits all. And based on the conversation we had earlier today, I think that's what you've done here is try to at least start out by crafting something that's unique to West Hollywood. This is this is an effort that will help us achieve not only hopefully traffic goals, but climate goals, transit efficiencies, and within that first 2 year period, hopefully increase people's level of understanding, educate employees about what benefits are available to them, educate employers about why this would benefit their businesses, and overall create an environment of support. So that's what happens if it gets done right. Clearly, there are some questions that still need to be worked out. So before we get to a final approval, we're going to have to address those issues. But I do think that we need to move forward, and creating a TMO, I think, it is very important. I worked with the TMO in Century City on some issues related to traffic and transportation from the Hollywood and West Hollywood area into Century City on a daily basis, and their businesses were directly engaged. It helped them understand exactly the impact of their businesses on the Century City area and how what choices they could make to directly affect those impacts. So I think what we're trying to achieve here isn't a punishment system or something like that. We have businesses that are doing this already, and they're surviving and have been surviving for a long time. So I don't think this is something that's intended to put anyone out of business or cause anyone hardship. It's instead actually trying to engage the community in what everyone identifies as the number one issue, which is traffic in the city. So if we're going to solve it, we all have to be invested in that solution. And so I think we're getting there. I want to move. I'm supportive of moving forward, and I would just again caution that we continue to engage the business community as it moves forward, so we're addressing their concerns. Thank you.
Councilmember D'Amico.
Thank you, Mayor. So 3 quick things. First of all, thank you for this. It's really thorough and smart, and we'll figure out the parts of it. I do sort of like the idea of doing a pilot program with some of the larger employers. And what I wasn't, after my update on the phone, what I wasn't able to sort of gather, hilariously enough, was is Uber considered one of these employers? And Lyft. And I think we need to factor in that those are major employers in this city, and they report to work on our streets, and they drive around our streets. And so I think we need to make sure that rideshare is considered part of our TDM ordinance. And I'm not sure how that gets factored in, and I'm not sure anyone's ever done that, but it just seems to me that in this sort of open world of transportation management and circulation management, if we're trying to get people out of their cars, but we're putting them in other people's cars, we want to know how we're managing that as well. And I think we've done some of that. Oscar and others have put in drop-off points, and we've begun to think sort of more globally about the impacts of those new businesses. But I would like to see that. So, and I also want to second Councilmember Meister's suggestion that maybe this could be an in-house, tied to our bike share, tied to our other sort of transit on the street things. It's an awful lot of money to spend to have somebody prepare reports when we have really great staff people who should be engaging with our businesses anyway. And so I'm excited to move this along, and I'm happy we can take a vote whenever the mayor is ready.
Councilmember Meister.
A question. The Nexus study, when will that be done? I mean, in terms of when will that be done, and this, and because I think one will impact the other, so I think it's important that they come back to us at the same time.
The Nexus study is anticipated to be done around summer of this year, and the information and the data that's going into this program currently will be feeding into the Nexus study.
Okay, because I don't want to, decide on a program without having that information first. And in the Nexus study, will you also, besides Uber and Lyft, those types of vehicles, will we also include things like construction, trucks, traffic? That's part of the whole Nexus study, wouldn't that be?
We can visit the policies that go behind how we manage construction activities.
Okay.
So, but it wouldn't be part of the analysis into the impact fee, but it will be, we can discuss it on the policy level.
Okay, because there are impacts from that. Okay, thank you.
So I just want to clarify what we're doing tonight, or what you're asking us to do. One is to receive the update, and the second part of the recommendation is to direct staff to continue based on the draft that you've presented us. The draft that you've presented us is designed to update our existing transportation demand management ordinance, which we've had in place for many years. We're required to have this kind of ordinance. So obviously we want it to be updated and we want it to be current. But that doesn't necessitate that we actually go in this direction. Which employers are subject to the requirements, that is really a discretionary thing with the City Council. So I think I share some of the concerns I've heard expressed tonight. I think all of us want to try to do whatever is appropriate to reduce traffic, not just traffic that's generated by our businesses and their employers or employees, but traffic that's generated by us, the residents. So I think that we also need to be thinking about how do we reduce transportation impacts by our residents and their commutes to their workplaces, which oftentimes are outside of the city of West Hollywood, and that isn't really included here as I see it. I live in a large building, so there are lots of deliveries to that building all day long. Are we thinking about the impact of that on our transportation systems? I share the concern that Councilmember Meister raised about the $200,000. I have no concern that we're contracting with people, but $200,000, I think, annually as transportation advisors to help our businesses comply with the ordinance and understand what they could do to help reduce traffic in the city. I mean, I think we'd be better off spending that money simply to buy bus passes for people rather than spending it on consultants. And I know that this is not something that our existing staff can handle, not that you don't have the intellect or ability to do it, but you have other obligations. So I guess I'm less supportive of this approach. I think maybe we look at going after larger employers who probably have greater capacity, who could partner with us on this. And maybe this is something we look at different, we already have different standards for smaller employers, but I think some of the smaller employers probably should be exempted altogether, simply because I don't think they will have the ability to comply with this, and then we're going to be spending a lot of time trying to enforce. And as I said, I think the money could be better spent on improving transportation directly rather than indirectly in this way. So you have asked us for input. We've all given you input. I think we're all in agreement that we should receive the update. That's not a problem. And I think we do need to have a TDM ordinance, so I don't know that anyone's objecting to the updating of the ordinance, but as you can see, there's some different views about what that update should include. Do you need further information from us?
No, I think we can take your feedback and come back to you with options that will address the issues that you raised.
And we may still not be completely in agreement on that, but hopefully as you listen to all our comments tonight, you will synthesize them and incorporate them and maybe come up with something that is a delicious ordinance that we can all find very tasty. I was thinking about the sausage analogy, right? All of our ideas come into this sausage, which some people think is delicious. I'm a vegetarian, so I'll vote no on the sausage. All right. Do we need to move forward with the motion, or is it the consensus of the council? Okay, consensus of the council, we can move on. Thank you for all of your time tonight. Are we ready to just keep going, council? Just keep plugging through. 4C, Comprehensive Lobbyist Services Plan. City manager, are you, John Leonard, I see, is approaching. So I assume this is a tag team with the city manager and John Leonard. Okay. Do we need a staff report on this item? Brief staff report has been requested.
That's what I planned. So this item directs staff and the city's lobbyists to analyze the city's current lobbying contracts and efforts, and based on that, to prepare a comprehensive next-generation lobbying and advocacy services plan that incorporates both county, regional, state, and federal lobbying work. Staff will also look at how social media and public relations can be incorporated into this new lobbying and advocacy efforts. These type of efforts have recently become more common within these realms and have been effective in many cases. So once prepared, staff will return to council with the comprehensive plan as well as suggested next steps for implementing it, such as issuing a request for proposal for lobbying services based on what the plan incorporates over the different state, local, and federal levels. This item is also requesting that the current city lobbyist contract be extended for 4 months. This would be through the end of the current legislative session, which ends in the fall. This allows us the time to prepare the comprehensive lobbying services plan for the future and allow the work to continue within the legislative session for our current lobbying efforts. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Meister, you had some question. I think you're the one who didn't want this put on consent, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I think you said you had comments as well.
I'm okay on this one.
Okay. Well, first of all, I really appreciate all of the years that Halima Shah and Associates has, given the city and all of the work that she's done. I think one of the things that we have to think about is that efforts to lobby Sacramento or our federal government, we see what's really been effective has been, March for Our Lives, where it's a grassroots coalitions and a grassroots campaign. There's so much money in politics now that I don't know that I'm just going to say the old school lobbying is the right way to go about things for the future. And I like that you said next gen, but I'd like to think that I'll still be here for next gen. So that, but I do have concerns about how involved the lobbyist is in analyzing this, because if it hasn't changed over the last 30-something years, I think we should be looking at maybe some, looking at to see what other cities are doing, and try to get some new ideas. And I do think that we really need to do an RFP at some point, because we have not had an RFP out since the 80s, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And we do see that other cities are paying substantially less for lobbying services. Now, I'm not saying that, that our person doesn't, do many other things, but I think that that's something we need to look at, and look at an apples-to-apples comparison on a scope of services. So I'm glad that you've brought this to us, and I just want to make sure we're open-minded in terms of what we're looking at in the future, because I don't know if Helene is, planning to retire or not, but that if she isn't, then that might affect what, how this analysis is done. So I just think that we should make sure that we involve some other, look at some other cities, and again, like maybe get some thoughts from some futures thinking people to see what would be effective for us. I mean, we see that, for example, we have Norm Emerson for the transportation, and he's an expert in that field. Maybe what we need are experts in certain areas, that they are just expert in those areas rather than a generalist. And so I just want to make sure we're open-minded as we look at this, and I don't want to exclude the possibility of RFP in the next month or so, because if we want to do that, we want to make sure that we have transition time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and certainly staff will be the lead for this comprehensive lobbying services plan. The existing lobbyists would be involved just for knowledge over the past 30 years of kind of what we've done before, but certainly staff will be taking the lead. Staff will be looking at other examples and coming up with this plan so that we know what we're issuing an RFP for, and we know what we want in the future.
Right, and the other consideration also is internal. We have a legislative analyst who works for our city who knows a lot about what's going on in Sacramento. The difference is that that person also knows what's happening right here in West Hollywood. Where I became concerned is when SB 827 was proposed, that to me, our lobbyist should have been waving her arms saying, danger, danger, pay attention to this, and that didn't happen. I mean, I read about it in League of Cities newsletter. So I just want to make sure, that we think about that we want somebody who really feels our local issues, not just knows them, but really understands them.
Yes.
Councilmember D'Amico.
Thank you, Mayor. I support moving this along and keeping the lobbyists employed till the end of the legislative session. But I have to say that I haven't really had the sense that the lobbyist has worked for all five of us for the entire time I've been on the council. I think she's had a very narrow idea about what the kinds of things we wanted her to do, and when we pressed her to do things, I often had the sense that she was half committed. And, if her job is to make elected officials believe that she's advocating and what she's advocating for, and she can't convince the one of the five that's paying her, I just don't believe she has her game on. And I think specifically, I think about the Ellis Act and Costa-Hawkins that we, in the middle of the worst housing crisis this state has ever had, she couldn't get out of committee. And I listened to those phone calls week after week. She never said, I need your help. I need you to give me $100,000 to get people to send us notes. I mean, the person who did our metro lobbying, they sat in that chair month after month or every 3 months and asked for another $150,000, another $150,000. We gave it to them because they convinced us they could get it done, and they seem to be getting it done. And, I think Helene has done some good things over time, and I'm just concerned that we have some nightshade lenses on. And, I don't think we're getting our money's worth. I don't think that she has been advocating and doing the work that all five of us have been wanting her to do. And, I asked her, she sat in that chair, and I asked her to come here and update me every quarter on what we were doing, and 2 years went by, she never came down here. That's just not what an lobbyist does. She could have called me up. I have a cell phone. Every member of the public has my cell phone. She's never called me. So I want our city to move the ball forward in some key areas, and Helene can't do it. And we can we can go through a process and hire her again. And I'm telling renters who want the Costa-Hawkins Act change or the Ellis Act change, with our lobbyist, it won't happen. I'm telling developers and the public who are concerned about overdevelopment in Sacramento, pushing down our throats, taking away our local control. If we want local control, our lobbyist won't keep that from happening. So we can do what we're doing, but we know what we're getting. And I feel very strongly about it. She's done a great job. She's delivered some things in the 90s and in the 2000s, and she worked some magic with our staff to get some redevelopment funds back at 70 cents on the dollar. But I think that time, and we need a new way to think about lobbying, and I would like us to have more energy around it than we currently have.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Duran.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to express a different opinion than what's been expressed by my colleagues thus far. I've known Helene Machar since the mid-'80s, when the city first hired her to help craft AIDS policy in Sacramento. I was the chair of the Life AIDS lobby then, and Helene was the city's representative. So I have worked with Helene for 30 years. There's a difference between the politics of Washington and the politics of Sacramento. The politics of Washington is not bound by term limits, and the members of Congress and the U.S. senators who serve there serve at their pleasure until they decide to retire. Sacramento is differently constructed because of term limits. Because of term limits, members of the Assembly and Senate turn over within 12 years, which means that the most powerful people in the state capitol are not the legislators. It is the staff. It is the staff of the governor and the staff of the committees and the staff of the legislators who control the power in Sacramento. So the person you want to represent you is the person who has the strongest relationships with the staff in Sacramento. And those relationships are built on trust. And Helene knows those people, because most of the staff members in Sacramento have also been there for decades. So we get more than what we bargained for with Helene Machar. You cannot compare some contractor that you want to get unidentified with somebody who has 30-plus years of experience walking the halls of the state capitol, who has very high level of integrity and trust with the staffers. It's really not fair to bring up the Ellis Act and Costa-Hawkins. No lobbyist is going to stop the amount of money and influence that the real estate community invests in Sacramento. No lobbyist, no amount of letters or telephone calls. And when we had this debate here, I reminded everybody that the problem was going to be just getting a bill on the Ellis Act out of a committee was going to be the heavy lifting. It never happened. But that's not the fault of Helene Machar. That's not the fault of any of us. That's the fault of the way in which our system operates. And Costa-Hawkins actually happened the 2-year term when State Senator Jim Costa, who was a Democrat, coupled up with Assemblymember Bob Hawkins, who was a Republican from Cerritos, and the 2 years that Kurt Pringle was the Speaker is the 2 years when the Ellis Act and Costa-Hawkins went through. And it hasn't changed since then. And even though the Democrats now control all the levers of power in Sacramento with supermajorities, they don't see fit to make any changes because of the incredible amount of influence that real estate has on the state capitol. So it's really not fair to fault Helene Machar. I don't think with an army of lobbyists you're going to have any different result in terms of Costa-Hawkins or the Ellis Act. The reason I asked to have this item held from the last meeting was because I knew I had a unique experience in that I've worked with Helene for decades. And she, in my opinion, is one of the most respected voices working the state capitol. She works for us. She works for the disability community. She's not one of these high-paid lobbyists being paid by oil or gas or real estate or any other special interests that weigh heavily up there. She represents really good issues. And people left of center have a great deal of respect for her, and those are the people in power. So I have nothing but good things to say about Helene Machar. I hope she sticks around for as long as possible. When we get to the issue of Washington, D.C., I think we do need to think a little differently about that, because the reality is it's a different set of politics. We have legislators who are there for lifetimes, who control a lot of the levers of power, and the staff are not as empowered. And of course, now we have a Republican Congress, so we're not able to do much. But should that change in November, should the Democrats retake the House and or the Senate, or both, I pray to God, then we will need to have somebody who knows how to work. The leaders, the majority leader, it's a different game in Washington, D.C. than the game in Sacramento. So I'm happy to continue having this discussion. I just hope that we do it within the context of what's the reality on the ground in both the state capitol and at the Washington, D.C. Capitol. Thank you.
Councilmember Horvath.
Thank you, Mayor. I tend to agree more with Mayor Pro Tem on this issue, taking them in reverse order. The recommendation to create a forward-thinking plan, I'm very supportive of. I think it's important for us to make sure that we're thinking about our priorities in a comprehensive manner. How are they applied at the county, state, and federal level, as well as within the regional organizations that we participate in. So I'm glad that we're coming up with a plan and actually having that conversation actively. That's great. As one of the newer members of council, I've worked with Helene, even though she's been at the city for a very long time. I've found that she's been very effective. Even as recently as when SB 827 was announced, I was in Sacramento with California Contract Cities Association, representing the city there. She was there. We were in the room with Scott Wiener when it was announced, having the conversations with him immediately about the concerns we were going to see as a city. So I think she's on it. I think in my experience, she's very checked into the issues that have not only been legacy issues of the city, but also the way our priorities manifest in 21st century issues. So I think she's done a really good job. One thing that matters is also, in addition to having Helene up there, having us also develop those relationships as well. I hear often, whether it's with Clean Power Alliance going before the Public Utilities Commission, you can have your executive director or staff people go, but it's when an elected official goes before that body to represent their community that people check in a little bit differently. So I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're present for the issues that our community is really asking us to be heard on. That's why I was up there, and we were represented as a city during that housing discussion, so this year, and it's not just recently. We've done this for many years. So I think that's why having a comprehensive plan is really important, making sure that we're thinking about all those different strategies and using Helene in the best way possible. Her experience is plentiful, but it also benefits us to have our voices heard directly wherever those conversations are being had. So I'm supportive of this item tonight.
Thank you. I also am supportive of this, and I had the opportunity, like the Mayor Pro Tem, to work with Helene for more than 30 years. You, John, got a chance to work with her before you became a council member, but I've worked with her since she became the city's lobbyist back in 1986. She was an outstanding advocate for the city's HIV and LGBT issues. She's been so well regarded in Sacramento for her commitment to the city, as well as her relationships with the various people throughout Sacramento. She is so well regarded there. Everyone trusts her. Everyone comes to her for advice. She also has really played a leadership role with respect to LGBT elected officials in the state of California, helping the caucus in the League of Cities, California League of Cities, meet and communicate regularly. She is a perfect fit for the city of West Hollywood, and I think to hold her responsible, because we haven't moved Ellis repeal or Costa-Hawkins repeal is really not fair. When those bad pieces of legislation got enacted, I mean, for many years, it was Senator David Roberti, which is probably before most people's time here. He was the speaker, and he blocked all of the anti-rent control legislation through the legislature, and he was able to kill everything. Once he was gone, then essentially the floodgates opened. Landlords, realtors were able to pass both of those bills, and there was no one there to stop them. Helene really has led the effort to try to whittle away at some of that, to carve out exceptions. She's also organized other cities that have similar views. We have to keep in mind, even though there's a terrible housing shortage in California and in West Hollywood, most cities in this state are not rent control cities. Most cities in the state do not support our views, and to think that the state legislature is suddenly going to join us in repealing that bad legislation, I think that's not realistic, and I think it's a little bit naive. So I understand that at some point Helene will likely retire. I also think we need a comprehensive plan because, as we've all recognized, lobbying the county supervisors and the Metro Board is very different than lobbying the legislature in Sacramento, and it's very different from lobbying Washington, D.C. So I think we need to go forward, and we need to be thinking long range. How are we going to improve and increase our lobbying presence? So I support the staff's recommendation. Councilmember D'Amico.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say that I'm assuming that your use of naive was intentional, frankly. But I don't think it's naive of me to want our lobbyists to have a plan that reflects how we're going to move forward. My experience of our lobbyist is that she reacts really well, but she doesn't plan very well. And that maybe after 30-some years of being our lobbyist and having many of the concerns and roadblocks that you very adequately listed, has put her in a position where she's forgotten that we have goals and we'd like to move things down the field a little. So I don't think it's naive of me to express strongly that we need to have a lobbyist who will plan our future, not react to the legislation that well-meaning, 6-year legislators are coming and going. In my mind, I don't see that plan. That's why I pressed Paul in January and February to put this on our agenda, to have a plan, to bring our lobbying efforts into the 21st century, to really think about what legacy the 5 of us are leaving the next 50 years of this city through our lobbying efforts in Sacramento as legislators, like Mayor Pro Tem Duran described, arrive, spend a short amount of time, want to have some kind of legacy, and then depart. And so from my point of view, that's my concern. She's supposed to be working for all 5 of us. You might feel, Councilmember Horvath might feel, Councilmember Duran might feel that she works for the 3 of you. I don't feel like she's working for me, and I would like to have a lobbyist that did. So that's what I'd like. And I don't think that's naive. I think, I spent 4 years lobbying in Washington, 3.5 for an AIDS organization. I know how this goes in my own way, different from the way that you two know it and Lindsay and Lauren know it. But I don't see her delivering a future for us. I see her committing to recreating the past, which this is a great place. We got a lot done. I would just like to see us have a better set of options, and I'm hopeful that this thing that I moved, and I had the city manager and John put on the agenda, will get us there. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Just one final point. I don't know if I think maybe part of what you're feeling is that she's not communicating with you, and when you say you want her to work for you, I think we have to be cautious up here, all of us, that she's not supposed to work for us as individual council members. She's supposed to work for us collectively as a city council. And that's why we set council priorities. So I hope that however we move forward, we also, I think, need to have some clarification up here as to how do we communicate with the lobbyists? How do we make sure she's routinely and regularly communicating with each of us so that no one feels like they're being left behind? I will say, I don't communicate with Helene regularly. I communicate with her through the council meeting when we adopt our priorities, and she gives us updates on it. So that may be something we need to clarify. How do we want that communication to occur?
Yes, I would agree with that. We will include that.
All right, so we do have a motion, and we had a lengthy discussion that's been seconded. Are we prepared to vote? All right, all those in favor, please push your button. And it has been approved, so thank you for bringing this forward. Can we keep going, Council? All right. Let's see, 4C, we just approved. 4D was moved to consent. 4E is reconvening the Ethics Reform Task Force. Mike or Yvonne, are you giving this report?
Actually, our Assistant City Clerk will be giving a brief report. She represented the City Clerk's division on this task force.
We rarely hear from you, Melissa.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. This item requests that the City Council reconvene the Ethics Reform Task Force. The task force will comprise of Max Kanan, who is an attorney that specializes in election law, campaign finance law, and government ethics law. Joseph Guadarrama, who is a former Ethics Reform Task Force member, is also an expert in governmental ethics. And also, Elizabeth Ralston served on the Ethics Reform Task Force previously, and she's the former president of the League of Women Voters. It also requests that the council direct the Ethics Reform Task Force to conduct at least one, but no more than 3 meetings, and return with its recommendations to the council by July of 2018.
Thank you. We do have one public, any questions for staff? We have one public speaker, Steve Martin.
Steve Martin, West Hollywood, and I guess you're going to get the band back together. The last time you did this, I commended you for, it was a really good group of people, brought forward a lot of really constructive suggestions and recommendations, most of which you adopted. This is really the next step, and I appreciate the fact that staff and council is committed to, bringing more sunshine onto the 3rd floor and to work to creating a better culture at City Hall and a more open culture at City Hall. Particularly in regard to the bequested donations, the bequested gifts, we've struggled with that. That has started off innocently enough with people going on the AIDS ride and the AIDS marathon. I know John Hyman was, had been doing that for years and years and years. But it's morphed over the years into things that we did not anticipate. And it has influenced, and there's a perception that it influences decision-making in ways we did not anticipate. The $10,000 donation to the Gay Men's Chorus when Athens got its non-competitive bid for the exclusive trash collection, I was for that contract because I thought it was the right thing to do for the city. But that donation really cast a pall on the decision-making process, and it cast a pall on y'all, frankly. And it didn't need to, and it doesn't need to. And a lot of people have expressed concerns on an item that's coming up later in regard to all the money that's awash with this marijuana dispensaries, the very lucrative licenses and privileges that you can give. How is that going to impact City Hall? I mean, I was listening to National Public Radio when John Duran was being interviewed, and he talked about how our city council had the golden ticket and had the power to make millionaires. And I got to tell you, that's true, but I also just found that articulation disturbing, because I think it really opens the door for influences, whether it's from relationships or money or donations, to come into the equation. And I think that's what you've spent a lot of time trying to avoid. So thank you for reconvening this group.
Thank you, Steve. Is this another speaker on this item? No, okay. So questions for staff? I see Mayor Pro Tem Duran has his button.
Yeah, I just need to clarify something because what Steve Martin just said isn't true. Actually, the Athens contract was awarded before they gave contributions to the Gay Men's Chorus, and the chorus has been around for 40 years. It has a full development staff, and any solicitations that are made by development staff, not by me. And those solicitations that I do make, I do disclose, anything over $1,000. So part of building community, in my opinion, is working with the nonprofits in the community. Government is not the solution to every problem. Nonprofit organizations, whether churches or AIDS Project Los Angeles or the Women's Law Center or arts organizations, are all important parts of building community and need to be supported by the business community and by our residents. I think the difference is one of my former colleagues, who I admire very greatly, I just want to say that, actually worked for a nonprofit and had her salary paid by that nonprofit. I can see where that produces a conflict of interest potentially. I don't get paid. I volunteer time on a board of directors, actually on 4 boards of directors: Van Ness Recovery House, Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles, National Association of Latino Elected Officials, and there's one more, and I'm just blanking because it's getting late and I'm tired. But all of those, that's me volunteering my time on nonprofit boards. And I hope that as many people as possible, especially lawyers who tend to know a little bit more, spend their time volunteering for nonprofit organizations. It's a great way to make use of one's time. And been happy to create Equality California, to reposition the Gay Men's Chorus, to serve on the AIDS Project Los Angeles board. And that's how I've been spending my time the last 15 years. And I just hope that others do that as well.
Councilmember Meister.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to address something that Steve Martin brought up. We actually decided when we were working on the ordinance on cannabis that we would not be allowed to take any contributions from applicants. Didn't we? I thought we did.
Mike, do you remember?
We did. We said our campaigns would not take any contributions.
Melissa, you're looking up like you might remember this.
There was a discussion about accepting them. My understanding was there wasn't to be communication with the city council members. I
No.
don't recall.
We
there was
didn't, we didn't
communication.
preclude that either. I have no recollection of anything on campaign contributions.
No, Mike
Right.
wasn't here. Your colleague was here that
Okay.
night. We did that.
Lauren Langer was here.
This is
Let's
an
ask
important,
Yvonne.
This is an important question, and I'd rather just bring an update item to the council at the next meeting. We'll send an email to you beforehand, but we'll just do a refresher at the next meeting, unless you can recall.
I know that we did discuss it, and that was one of the things that council wanted, and Deputy City Attorney Langer was here. One of the things that council wanted staff to look into, because I think this has been brought up before, and Mike spoke about First Amendment rights and donations. So I know council asked for that, but I think staff would probably have to come back and say whether or not that was something we could do.
I know what we did because I was just talking about this with someone. What we said was that, and it was my motion, that members of the committee that is selected by Paul may not talk to the council members, or the members that are applicants may not talk to that committee. And that we're going to have a public meeting for the Business License Commission to go over the cannabis businesses and all of that, and that council members may meet with applicants, because we meet with applicants for all kinds of things, and we never took a position on whether donations of any kind or any size for campaigns or otherwise would be disallowed. So we can have that, but that was the language in the minutes. I took the language out of the minutes and sent it in an email to someone on Friday.
And that's my recollection as well. So,
Yeah, it was brought up, but I did not feel that that was included in the final vote because our city attorney has spoken about that before, so I knew we would need to talk about that.
okay.
Well, there you go. Okay, it's out there somewhere. And then the only things that I would mention are that, first of all, I'm glad that we're reconvening the task force. I think that as we continue to do that, we may want some different people in the mix. I think we have one person who wasn't in the previous committee, because obviously if it's always the same ideas, you want to be able to have a mix of people. The other thing is that, just for transparency, I know that Joe Guadarrama worked on the independent expenditure campaign in the last election, and his company did. So I just wanted to make sure that people knew that, so it didn't come out later and people wondered why wasn't that mentioned in the staff report. So for transparency, I think it should be in there.
Councilmember Horvath?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm glad to see this is coming back as well. I think we started a conversation a couple of years ago, and I'm glad we're staying the course on making sure that we're achieving the goals that we set out to achieve, but also learning from every year's campaign experiences, especially as technologies evolve and the way that people campaign changes. We're going to have different ways, that we're going to need to talk about ethics in campaigning. So I'm glad we're continuing to have this conversation. I actually recall our discussion around cannabis businesses the way that Councilmember Meister did. When applications go live, I will be disclosing if anyone reaches out to me to have conversations, to be completely transparent with the community about who's trying to talk to me about that process, because I know that that is an issue and a conversation that's happening out in the community. And just because it's not a rule doesn't mean we can't be proactive in the way that we're communicating about this stuff. So, what we're trying to do is set a bar, and I think that everyone on this council is committed to upping our game and trying to make sure that we're being transparent with the community, and we're going to do that in ways as a council with this item, and we're going to do it in ways that are individual and specific to the ways that we govern individually as well. And so I'm glad to see that we're doing this. I expect that the council is going to vote unanimously on this, and I want to thank our staff for reconvening and making sure we're staying the course in these efforts.
Other comments? I have two comments. One, thank you for bringing this forward. One comment that first I want to disclose that Max Kanan, one of the people who's proposed, he has consulted with me on several issues. Obviously, I think we all know Joe Guadarrama because of his involvement, but I wanted to disclose that Max has consulted with me on several items. I think one of the things we need to look at as part of this ethics reform is what is going to happen when we move to November elections. We will be moving our municipal elections to November in 2020. That's going to require people to reach a whole range more of people, a lot more people. Does that require us to adjust the campaign contribution limits in some way? One of the concerns that I had when we adopted the limitation that we adopted is that we were going to see a big increase in independent expenditure campaigns, and I think we have in fact seen that. So I think that's something that the committee needs to look at. And the Ethics Reform Task Force has primarily focused on elections, campaigns, donations. It hasn't really looked at, and maybe this is one of the new topics, hasn't really looked at our interactions with city staff, our communications with city staff, whether there should be some reporting or limitations on how we interact with city staff. And I think that's something that may be a new issue that has to be explored. So there's a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, we can go ahead and vote. There we go. It's approved. So we will be reconvening the task force, and Melissa, you'll be the staff person in charge of that effort?
Yes, I will, and a
Great.
member of the city attorney's office.
Thank you. 5A has been moved to consent. 5B is an advisory board appointment. This is the Mayor Pro Tem's. Are you ready on this?
I am, Mayor. First of all, I want to start by thanking Barbara Krupa. Barbara was my appointee to the Senior Advisory Board for the last 16 plus years, and I want to thank her for her service. I'm hoping that her health will allow her to come here to a council meeting so we can present her with a thank you from the community. But in her place, I am going to appoint Michael Hollingsworth. Michael's a long-term resident of the city, lives mid-city. He's an event planner and a writer and pretty well known across town. This is actually one of our boards that has had historically more women than men, so adding Michael, there's still more women than men on this board, but I think Michael will be a great addition. So I don't think Michael's here tonight, but I want to congratulate Michael Hollingsworth as the new appointee to the Senior Advisory Board.
Congratulations, Michael, and welcome aboard. We have one excluded consent calendar item, and that is 2N, the Parkway Design Ordinance. This is being brought forward by Councilmember Meister and Councilmember Horvath. I believe you pulled this item.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just wasn't exactly clear on the direction that we were giving to staff. It said to review, the report said that there wasn't a guideline, but obviously the recommendations reference the Parkway Design Guide, and it says to update as needed, and I'm not saying there isn't a need, I just didn't feel that the direction was clear about what we were looking to achieve here. I know that there have been items on, creating gardens in the parkways and doing other sort of creative things in the parkways, and so I didn't know if there was something specific that was being directed or... so that's all I wanted to clarify.
So what we have is we have guidelines, but it's not an ordinance, so it's not required. And so one of the things is to really convert the guide into an ordinance, at least giving minimum requirements for, first of all, for public safety reasons, because sometimes people will plant, things and you can't open up your door if you park on the, if you park in front of their parkway, or there are trip and fall hazards. And also with, there's been some confusion on whether we can use pebbles or not use pebbles. We have, like, for example, the city of Beverly Hills saying, oh, use pebbles in your parkway, but that's not something that we have in our guidelines. So it's really to, when I say update is needed, it's really to clarify and then set minimum requirements in order to have, so that code compliance can have some teeth, because right now they don't have teeth when it comes to the parkways.
Mayor Pro Tem Duran.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll support the item tonight for at least looking into it, but I want to express I have some doubts about it. And I can think, for example, she's not here tonight, but Planning Commissioner Lynn Hoopengarner has practically a rainforest on the Parkway in front of her house on Westbourne that would not fall within a drought-tolerant planting. And so I think in the desire to establish guidelines and some uniformity, we sacrifice creativity and people's ability to be creative with the parkways in front of their homes. And I understand the issue is to try to avoid having them look awful, But at the same time, I wouldn't want us ever to become more like the city of Irvine with cookie cutter parkways everywhere across the city.
No.
So I don't think that's the intent.
No.
But I mean, we don't have that in front of us tonight, but I have some concerns, depending how it comes back, of anything that would take away from people being able to be creative in terms of what they want to do in front of their homes. And so I'm just expressing that now because I wanted to say it now. And I'll support it tonight because we're just going to investigate and look. But ultimately, I do have some concerns about uniformity.
Yeah, the idea is not to stifle creativity. It's really just to have some minimum requirements for public safety purposes and to give code compliance a little bit more teeth in order to deal with issues like that. And the guidelines, because we're in a different situation than we were back in, I think it was developed, the guidelines were developed at least 10 years ago, if not longer, to update that as well.
I'm a little confused myself because I know that we have cited people for things in the parkway in the past. So clearly we have some ordinance with some minimum standards currently in effect. Otherwise, we wouldn't have people complaining about getting cited for not maintaining their parkway. And I see Jeff Albel is here. Maybe I'm confused. I think there are two different issues here. One is the design of it, and the second is those minimum standards.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Jeff Albel, Code Compliance Manager. What we're looking to do would be to pebble size, things that aren't trip and fall hazards. Right now, you can have river rocks in, but engineering doesn't like river rocks, but it's a slip and fall hazard. So we would look at like the dimensions of the stone, whether the pavers.
Can you answer my question, which is, do we have an ordinance in place that allows us to cite property owners for not maintaining the parkway?
Well, yes, for lack of vegetation we do, but for other things we do not.
Okay,
Right.
so what we would be doing here is directing you to look at this and possibly putting some of these design guidelines or others into an ordinance that would allow us to cite the property owner.
Correct.
Okay, I understand the intent of this, but I think we need to be very careful about moving forward and what we put in that ordinance. People who own property get very upset that, number one, they're required to maintain a parkway that they believe belongs to the city, and number two, the idea that we're citing them for not maintaining that city parkway property really offends them. So I think we need to be cautious about that. We can still have the design guidelines, but I just want to express that. Okay, so the item before us is a direction to staff to review all of this, possibly review our existing ordinance and incorporate some, or if necessary, draft a new ordinance. Okay? Yes. We're okay. All right, it's motion and seconded. There's a motion and a second. Any further comments here? Please no. Okay. Item 2N has now been approved. We now have item 6A, which is amendments to the city's cannabis use ordinance. And I see Jerry, our senior contract planner. You may be a player as well. I don't know, Jerry. Jerry and Jeff is still here. John Leonard, Jackie, the whole team is here. Yvonne, how many speakers do we have on this item?
We have 10.
Okay. So, staff report. Do we need a staff report? No. Do we have questions for staff at this point?
Well, I actually, here's what I would like. Maybe just in the spirit of full disclosure, the staff report can put on the verbal record the changes that are being requested,
Yes.
so that there's a sort of actual record of us not saying, we don't need a staff report, we can make these decisions on our own, we got this, boom. So maybe we can just skip the flowery stuff and tell us the actual changes that you're recommending, and that would be appreciated.
All right. And I think those are in our staff report on items pages 2, 3, and 4. But
Sure.
can you do that for us, Jerry? Thank you.
Thank you, Council and Mayor. I do have a short presentation, but as anticipated, I'd just like to go through the major changes. We are returning with some revisions to the ordinance, and basically the proposed changes include further clarification regarding the application process. So we're looking at the process, just making sure that we have the pre-screening process, the zone clearance, and the cannabis license as the last step. We reorganized certain sections of the ordinance, again, for clarification for the potential business applicants and the council and the public. We also did a clarification on the regulations for consumption areas, adult use, and delivery services, and changes actually to allow indoor as well as outdoor smoking of cannabis in licensed consumption areas. So that's probably the biggest change to the ordinance that you'll see. Thank you.
Any questions for staff? I have one question at this time. In the ordinance, you are deleting the requirement for a security plan, and I'm assuming that that's because it doesn't make sense to have that at this stage where they don't yet have a location necessarily, that we would require the security plan at a later point, or maybe I'm wrong.
So it's actually being deleted out of the ordinance because it's going to be a part of the screening application. So they're going to provide us with their concept security plan. Once that actually goes to the Business License Commission, if they're one of the top 8 selected in each license category, then that would be firmed up and included within the license. But it was more of a duplicative thing in the ordinance. So one of the categories of things you have to provide in the license is all the items that were in the screening application. And since it's now a complete section in the screening application, it didn't need to be in that other section as well.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. We do have a number of speakers. The first speaker is Buck Angel, to be followed by David Kaufman.
Good evening, Council. I appreciate your time here this evening. I have a cannabis company called Pride Wellness, and my cannabis company deals with the LGBTQ community. I am vetted by the LGBT Center here in Los Angeles, and I donate part of my proceeds to the LGBT Center for homeless senior living. And so we're helping to build a senior center here in Los Angeles with the cannabis money that we create. But what I want to talk to you about this evening is the fact that I'm a transsexual man, and I've been in this community for over 30 years. And I was in this community in the early epidemic of AIDS. And I know that this community has created the legalization of cannabis by creating the drug called Marinol. And that is because the gay community created the legalization of cannabis that many years ago. And so my partner and I, who is also a trans man, created our company in order to create a wellness around cannabis and to help the LGBT community to understand the usage of cannabis as a wellness product and not as drugs. Because our community is inundated with Oxy, Vicodin, all kinds of drugs that they're using that they could actually be using cannabis as a wellness product. I'm 30 years sober and I use cannabis, and I'm a big activist. I travel the world, I talk about cannabis all over the world. I do a huge amount of activisms in this community, in this country, and I create change. And I really believe that me and my partner and people who are in the gay community should be considered before any other people who are not gay and in this community for licenses and to be able to create wellness places in West Hollywood, because we see more, and I hate to use this word straight, but we see more straight people getting licenses and more straight people being sort of put in this position because of money. Our community doesn't have money. Transgender people don't have money, but we want to create businesses. We want to create jobs for our community. In order to do that, we need to be able to create jobs from the ground up. And if we don't have $250,000 for licenses, how are we going to be able to be in the game? So that's what I wanted to.
Thank you. Your time has expired. I would ask people not to click their fingers or clap while the speaker is speaking out of respect for the speaker. Thank you. David Kaufman, to be followed by Leon Mestivoy.
My name is David Kaufman. I was campaign deputy for Prop 64. I'd like to commend the City Council on their push for on-site consumption. California wasn't the first state to legalize cannabis, but it was the first state to allow for on-site consumption. West Hollywood has taken this issue unlike any other city and has allowed for it to get developed to a place where you are now. I really hope that you all are able to push this application process forward before other cities and you flush this out in the way that you've been doing. I really appreciate the improvements.
Thank you, David. Leon Mestivoy, to be followed by Sergio Barraza. Leon.
I'm Leon Mestivoy. That is also, we're right after each other. My partner, Buck Angel, for Pride Wellness. Sorry, I have laryngitis. I also own a delivery service, and my partner and I, Gregorio, had to leave. We've been working in the community for 2 years now, and I just wanted to say, as somebody who has been working really diligently to stay in cannabis and do all the legal actions that we need and to serve our community, together between Buck and Greg and myself, we have over 5,500 patients that need our services. I myself have been an activist, transgender man, and LGBT activist and artist in the community. I was thankful enough to get a grant I'm a photographer, to do work with transgender seniors that I got from my chief, from your councilman just last year. And we, as Buck did mention, we give back through the LGBT Center for the Senior Services Department. So I think we just really wanted to recognize the fact that we already have a lot of patients that believe in us, and we do see that, seeing that we don't necessarily maybe have the push or the finances, that we want to make sure that being people that have been in the community for so long and have been working with the community and giving back to the community, that we still have a voice. Not that I have a voice tonight, but in general have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you. Sergio Barraza, to be followed by Jackie Subek.
Hi, sorry for snapping earlier. I was into it. My name is Sergio. I work for CannabisLicense.com from 9 to 5. After 5, I work for pro bono social equity applicants in San Francisco and in LA County who are applying for the social equity program under a charity called Canna Solutions. What we found is that for the WeHo applications, because there's so many limited license types, that people are basically kind of bidding for them already. It's already industry talk, who's applying, how much money they're going to put into it, which I think is really unfair, and the first speaker spoke about. I'm really disappointed that West Hollywood does not recognize the need for a social equity program, especially since cannabis is really intrinsically tied to LGBT rights, especially since LGBT people of color have a very hard time finding jobs, especially since they have really high suicide rates and lower education rates than other people in the LGBT community. I think that there needs to be something done about this, and I really think that West Hollywood should push for a social equity program that will allow people in West Hollywood, especially LGBT people and LGBT people of color, to be able to grow within this industry. When you look around this room, you can already see there's a lot of investors in here who are willing to take this pink dollar away from the community, and that's something that I really don't want to see. So thank you so much for this time.
Thank you, Sergio. Jackie Subek, to be followed by Sherry Franklin.
Good evening. I'm Jackie Subek.
I just want to say that I'm very, very happy with the policy that we've put together over the last 8 or 9 months. I think we actually have some of the best policy in the state. To be honest, I've spent a lot of time looking at other policies, and I just haven't seen anything that's so open and looking down the future. So I first want to say that. I also want to say that I support basically all of the changes and revisions to the ordinance. I think they've all been really, really well thought through. They've talked to the community, staff has done their research, and I just wanted to say that I am in full support of everything. And I'm particularly happy that we were able to make the changes in the ordinance to line up with the state, with Prop 64, and also with the Compassionate Use Act. We've now made a dedicated point in the ordinance to make sure that we still continue to recognize our 18 to 20-year-olds who are medical patients and don't rule them out just because we have recreational for 21 and over. So that's it. I don't have anything to complain about today. Just wanted to thank all you and really happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie. Sherry Franklin, to be followed by Danny Shaker.
Good evening. My name is Sheree Franklin with Think and Grow Lab. I have a few questions. We also want to make sure that it's a great application and opportunity for people to be able to submit. Think and Grow Lab works with social equity applicants and to make sure that they have the skills and knowledge and fair opportunity to be able to enter this new green economy. There probably are some things that even leaders within this field can do to make sure that members of this community are involved in the process. There are plenty of other opportunities, and maybe we can focus on how they can engage, from working with the medicinal patients to providing delivery services in partnership with existing people who are going to apply. But I had a few questions regarding the planning process. I know that you indicated you're not going to have over-concentration as an issue, but in the report it mentioned you were meeting with the hotels. I wasn't sure if there's going to be a focus on hotels versus the boutique feel, and I just wanted to know how that will impact deciding where licenses will be distributed. You have a plan that says no, you're not focused on this location, but a lot of the questions are geared towards having a location. For instance, a security plan has to relate to where your location is going to be. I'm not sure how you'll have that in the screening process without really understanding the site. That's going to be very imperative. The other things, when you talk about the urban feel and being able to actually meet the requirements of urban design standards. Again, we can all use our great imaginations. I have a wonderful imagination as to how you can create an opportunity, but when it comes down to it, the person has to have a site to be able to meet some of those requirements. So I'm just wondering if the questions are going to allow for people to be able to say things and then not be able to act on them at the end of the day, particularly around the security plan. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm sure staff, if you haven't talked to them individually, that they will make themselves available to answer some of those questions. Danny Shaker, to be followed by Della Shaker.
Good evening, Danny Shaker, West Hollywood property owner. I wanted to raise some concerns we have about the screening application process. I'm aware that draft application is coming out in 2 days, and I'm confident that most, if not all, of our concerns will be addressed. However, I wanted to bring them to light nonetheless. The general criteria used to ranking applications do not have enough nuances to them, which can lead to a subjective scoring process and the potential for many applications to have tie scores. One of the criteria is design and concept. How does one objectively score design and concept? I have no doubt that WeHo will receive hundreds of innovative designs and concepts that meet the city's urban design standards. As Cherie also mentioned, I fear that many will submit very elaborate designs and concepts to get through the screening process, but with no plans to actually deliver on them. Another criteria is the ability to demonstrate the quality of cannabis strains and product offerings. Again, you will receive hundreds of applications with teams that have years of experience with cannabis products. Another is social equity in terms of providing a living wage and employee benefits and compliance with local, state, and federal employee non-discrimination policies. All applications will affirm to provide living wages, employee benefits, and comply with employee non-discrimination policies. How are you going to differentiate that? Again, security plan. We will all have a very tight security plan, especially if you don't have a site, you can make up anything you want. The state calls for having cameras over your cashier registers and entrance and exits. If you don't have a site to show your site plan and where these cameras are going to go, it's all irrelevant. If we are asking the evaluation committee to select 8 applications from categories that will receive hundreds of applications, we need to make the process more detailed and objective. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight.
Thank you. Della Shaker, to be followed by Nasser Azimi.
I'm short, so. Good evening, Mayor, council members, and staff. My name is Della Shaker, and I'm a resident of West Hollywood. I also run a law practice called West Hollywood Law Group. The majority of my practice is dedicated to assisting employees who have been discriminated and harassed due to sexual orientation, race, gender discrimination, and other FEHA violations. I also dedicate 30% of my practice to ensuring business owners are educated in the practice of law, employment regulations. Doing so, I'm currently assisting cannabis business owners in ensuring they comply with local, state, and federal regulations. Thus, I want to thank you for your leadership in making sure that these business owners comply with these regulations. Lastly, if you guys have any questions for me or need my assistance, you can look me up at www.weholg.com. Thank you and good night.
Great. Thank you. Nasser Azimi, to be followed by Jana Khan.
Mayor and council members, thank you so much for the opportunity to stand before you. I am Nasser Azimi, and I'm president of Ohana Operations. We are a high-tech statewide operator in the cannabis industry, and I'm not here tonight to offer you contributions or donations or ask for any favors. We're going to allow our operational capacity from a systemic standpoint to speak for itself during the selection process. I do want to tell you that I totally appreciate you legalizing marijuana, cannabis for that matter, and the fact that you've taken the time to spread the retail opportunity across multiple channels. That is definitely going to foster creativity, but it's also going to essentially eliminate the possibilities of one retail entity monopolizing the entire scenario. So thank you for that. Appreciate the staff putting the hard work and time into it, and you approving the initiatives. Have a great night.
Thank you. Yana Khan, sorry if I got that right, to be followed by Steve Martin, who will be our last speaker.
My name is Jana Khan. I've been running a company called Pain Free Society of California now for 14 years. I'm a lesbian who actually came into the gay community from being out of the heterosexual community. I've had a lot of adverse things go on with the actual gay community because I came out of the heterosexual community. And what I want to say is this. I've been operating dispensaries in the city of Los Angeles now for close to 10, 11, 12 years. And I feel that the little guy never gets a shot. And so I'm happy that West Hollywood is going to maybe give the little guy a shot. And yes, I'm part of the group with Leon and Buck Angel, and we are 100% gay. We really are hoping we can get a shot at a license here. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Martin.
Steve Martin, West Hollywood, and just to go reminisce, I remember working with John Heilman on compassionate use of marijuana back in, the 80s or whenever we were a lot younger. There's so much that there's been some great speakers, and I think that we really have concerns about the subjectivity and the requirements. I mean, I think there's a lot of things we want to make sure that don't happen. We want pesticide-free. We don't want people raising marijuana on public lands. But we also want to see social equity. We also want to see diversity. There's a lot of excitement about this in the community, but there's also a lot of cynicism and trepidation about a corporate marijuana moving in, and also concerns about how this impacts the future. Because I'm very involved with the marijuana business through some of my divorce clients, and there's just a lot of money out there, a lot of cash out there, and people are concerned about how this will impact the integrity of our system that we fought really hard to do. And I just want to charge you, and I know you're very aware of it because I've heard you guys say this throughout this process. about keeping this process open and transparent, because this is really a pioneering effort that so many other cities are looking at, because they're not jumping into this. We are. So in many ways, once again, the world is watching. Certainly our constituents are watching. And all I can do is charge you to be cognizant of what you're creating and the kind of culture you're creating for the future council and the future of our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. That's our last speaker. Council discussion.
Move the item.
So I just want to go over the schedule because I want to be 100% sure. On April 4th, we're releasing the draft cannabis screening application and criteria.
That's correct. We'll be releasing the weighting criteria, which is to address some of the comments. The criteria that were in the ordinance were the general criteria. We have now taken those. We have a 7-page weighting criteria with different points valued at a number of different criteria. So that will be released on the 4th. On the 11th, we will have a public meeting where we will go through those weighting criteria, and anybody that wants to can come and ask us questions about those weighting criteria. We will take that information. We will make potential changes to the weighting criteria if we have concerns with it. The final screening application will be released the week of April 16th, and then the 30-day period will be in May.
And Mayor, I just wanted to address the question that I heard about subjective review, and I don't know. In my mind, we're not picking up the same trash can in front of 17,800 buildings. We're trying to place the right business in the right location in 2018 or 19, and there is a lot of subjectivity. And our city is, in fact, built on internalized subjectivity, the very things that Buck and others have talked about understanding your subjectivity, the community's subjectivity. So I think at this end of the council table, that's the kind of charm and glaze and grace that I hope ends up in these businesses and in this ordinance. Certainly at the other end of this process, yes, we want to make sure that the doors lock and the cameras work and whatever other boxes will be checked and rechecked by the people doing this. But that's one of the graces of West Hollywood, is that we understand our own subjectivity and we exercise that and bring that out as much as possible. So I encourage us to really think about the businesses, their effect on the street, their effect on the neighbors, their effect on the community itself. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Other council comments?
I have a couple questions and then comments. My first question, a member of the community suggested to me that the state law requires now that medical cannabis be taxed. Is that correct? What is the city doing about low-income patients who need access to medical cannabis?
So there are different taxes that are applied at the state level. The direct state tax applies to all cannabis. Sales tax does not apply to medical cannabis. One of the criteria that council put into the ordinance was providing discounted cannabis to qualifying medical patients, and that will appear in the weighting criteria as well.
Okay, and is that discounted cannabis made available through the dispensaries that are currently operating?
It is in our yes, it is in our ordinance currently.
Okay, and then the second question I had was how much longer will the existing businesses be allowed to operate as both medical and adult use on those temporary licenses?
Until we are done with the screening application process. So that
So if the screening application process takes until the end of the year, they'll operate through the end of the year on those temporary licenses?
They have to continue to renew the license with us, and we continue to grant renewals, but we do not anticipate that the screening application process will take until the end of the year. We believe it will be completed sooner than that.
Okay. So to address some of the comments that were raised tonight, I'm supportive of what's before us and glad to see these changes happening, but I think this is also an opportunity to address some concerns that are coming up in the community that may not be reflected in this report but are worth addressing here. First, someone commented that people are offering $250,000 or have to pay $250,000 for licenses. That's not true. The first stage of our application process, which I have in front of me, I'm happy to read out loud for you, is that adult use retail license would be $9,880. The cannabis consumption area with on-site adult use retail license would be $9,880. The cannabis delivery services located in West Hollywood would be $5,025. And the medical use dispensaries would be $9,880. So I just wanted to correct the record on that. Secondly, I have been very concerned, as many of you have expressed, about the social equity program. It seems that a lot of other cities, not only in California, but throughout the country, are creating these kinds of programs. And we did, as part of council discussion, address the issues of inclusion, and particularly with the LGBT community present in our city, and making sure that businesses that are large corporations outside of West Hollywood do not have an advantage simply because of their size and their financial status. So that is something that has been taken into account. And in fact, one thing that's been reflected back to me with the people that we've met with, including all the way up to the governor's office, is that we don't require that people secure their lease or their physical space until they have made it through the process. So we aren't asking people to pay month after month in lease, which we know can be very high, especially in West Hollywood. We're not asking people to purchase their property or have any of those things that require a lot of upfront capital without a lot of that is a lot of business risk without necessary guarantees moving forward. That's not part of our process. And what we've heard consistently is that's very unique to West Hollywood's process. So that's sort of baked into what we're doing. We didn't create a set aside in that regard. However, I've met with at least 5 different people who have worked on social equity programs, both within the state and around the country, who have brought up different aspects of how we can incorporate more equity and inclusion aspects into what we're doing. I've directed staff, they've met with those folks. We're going to have a community meeting according to this application process. The public meeting will take place on April the 11th. So any of those suggestions, I would very much encourage anyone who has input or thoughts about that, especially to participate in that discussion, to make sure that your voice is heard in that process, because I do think that we are a community of social justice. We are a community about social equity, and that's why a lot of those things were baked into our process. We don't feel that setting something aside necessarily guarantees equality in the long run. But we also want to make sure that we're being mindful and intentional in the process that we've created, knowing that we're opening up a whole new economy and opportunity for folks, hopefully right here in our community. There have been questions about disclosure that have come up, and people having secret conversations or having a leg up, or I heard reference tonight that people are already paying money. I don't know who that money is going to. It's not coming to me, and it hasn't gone to our staff. So I don't know who you're paying money to, but it's not going to anybody that's actually going to help you. The money that nobody's spending money at this point. The application process isn't open, and so once that application process opens, that's when people will start spending money. If people are paying consultants, that's on you. That's not the city's required process at this point in time. However, if you are interested in knowing who is contacting us at City Hall, our emails, just as a reminder, are a matter of public record. So you can always request email correspondence with council members. They are subject to disclosure records, so you can always do that. As I mentioned earlier, I just wanted to clarify so people know exactly what I'm doing. As of April 4th, if you contact me about and with any questions about a prospective business or about the process, I will be disclosing publicly, proactively, who you are, what kind of business you're looking to do, when you contacted me, and what generally what we discussed, not any specific issues. But I think it is important that people understand, that who's reaching out and how many times the people are going to be contacted. When we had this conversation previously, I said I can't even count the number of people I've talked to about this issue, and I know there's a lot of concern about that many people are coming to council and having those conversations, and that's why we had some of that discussion. So I'm going to be as transparent as I possibly can. I'm happy to answer any questions. Just know that as of April 4th, I will be actively, publicly disclosing that. It's not a bad thing or a good thing. I just think people have the right to know. And I'm glad that staff clarified the safety issue. I know that was something that came up as well. And I think especially for members of our community who haven't been supportive of legalization, safety issues are going to be a #1 concern. So we need to make sure that that's a top priority. Thank you. Sorry to be so long-winded, but I just wanted to address a lot of concerns I heard out there.
Councilmember Meister.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. One of the speakers brought up the hotels. Can you address that?
There was a meeting months ago, back in the beginning of the process, with hotel GMs. It was more just an informational item because we had had several applicants come forward, express interest in potentially locating a hotel. We wanted to talk to the hotel general managers directly to see if that was something they were even interested in. Many of them weren't. It was just an informational item that we brought forward to them, similar to the other community stakeholder meetings that we had.
Okay, and then can you just, once again, just very quickly explain the process? Someone submits an application and then...
Yes, so there is essentially a 3-step process. A screening application will be released this month. That screening application has a number of criteria in it. People will submit their screening applications, which is essentially going to describe their business, what they're proposing. Those will be reviewed and scored by a 5-member panel that has different expertise on different topics within the cannabis industry and within other things that are important for us, architecture, et cetera. Once those are scored, that'll take several months. The top 8 ranking applicants in each of the category will then be granted the ability to move forward in the business license process. They will have to secure a zone clearance. They will have to secure a location at that point. They will get a zone clearance saying that the business is allowed in that location. Then they will go to the Business License Commission to get actually approved for their license. Their license will include a number of caveats. It will include a number of the items that they included in their screening application. Concurrently, at the same time, they will also be running through the building and safety and planning process, depending on the type of improvements they want to do at that location. If it's tenant improvements, it will be much more simple. If they're doing a ground-up construction or something else, which some may, that would take longer.
And so this will not be coming to council?
That is correct. The Business License Commission could be appealed to council, but otherwise this will not be coming to council.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Duran.
Mayor, I just want to make sure that people in the audience heard that. Don't contact us. We're not the decision maker. It's the 5-panel committee and the Business License Commission. Don't contact us. We're not going to be able to respond to you in any way that's meaningful. Do your work on your proposal. You don't need to contact us.
And I would also just point out, don't contact the Application Evaluation Committee. Council approved a policy several months ago that if you contact them, it is grounds for dismissal of your application. And they all have clauses where they have to notify us. If you even send them an email, if you give them a phone call to try and contact them about your application, it will result in dismissal of your application.
They can still contact you as staff people.
Yes.
They can.
I wanted to respond to one comment that was made about money being offered. Councilmember Horvath, you made a comment about the fee that is, for each license type. But I also want to remind everyone that these licenses are not transferable, so they're only good for the applicant that receives the application, and they're not transferable to any other person. So anyone that, is not interested in moving forward with the application will forfeit that, and it's not transferable.
Mayor, and I just want to say, I adore my colleague, and it's really late, but the policy that we passed in February was this: adopt a practice that prohibits all contact between cannabis business license applicants and members of the Cannabis Application Evaluation Committee or business license commissioners. So in fact, we're the only people you can contact, and we're not making the decision. So I don't want you to leave here that Councilmember Durant said contact the business license commissioners, because we in fact
Oh, no, I didn't
passed
say that. I
a
said work on your
policy
proposal.
that says
Yeah.
you are not allowed to contact the business license commissioners and the.
Yeah,
and
and I just wanted, so you all know, these 5 people on the panel, I don't even know who they are. I don't think any of us know who the 5 people are, so we're not involved in that decision-making. There's no game afoot out there that you're not part of, but.
So I have several comments quickly. First of all, because of the confusion up here about who people can contact and who applicants are allowed to contact, when we have the public meeting and the screening application, I'm assuming that it will be clearly spelled out who you can and cannot contact, correct?
Very clearly spelled out in the application who you can and can't contact and the penalties for contacting those you're not allowed to.
Okay.
And the training will be conducted by Lauren Langer.
Okay, great. So, colleagues?
I didn't realize I said encourage people to contact the panel or the business.
Excuse me.
It's
I'm
late. I did not
speaking.
do
I'm
that.
trying to tell you two to shut up. It is getting late, and we didn't take our break tonight, and I'm getting testy. Actually, I started the meeting testy. Now I'm just getting giddy. So my policy is not to communicate and not to meet with any people. I know that a number of the potential applicants have reached out to me, and my policy is to not meet with anyone until this goes through the process. I have referred all of the people who've had questions or comments directly to our staff, and I will continue to do that. So if you reach out to me, I will tell you I'm not meeting with you. It's not because I don't like you or disrespect you. I think staff can handle this, and I want them because they have more information. Second, I want to say that this process is necessarily subjective. We have tried to, and our staff is trying to quantify it as much as possible to make it as objective as possible. But ultimately, it is going to be a judgment call of which businesses are going to be the best businesses to locate in West Hollywood and serve our unique community. And so there will be some degree of subjectivity, and eventually, after this process, there's going to be some people who are happy because they get a license, and other people who are going to be dissatisfied. And that's just the way it is when we have a limited number of licenses to award, and we have a process that's necessarily subjective. The third point I want to make, I really appreciate all the communication and the outreach that you've had, and I appreciate the input that we've gotten from a lot of the people who have expertise because they've been operating businesses. I do want to caution that the people giving the input obviously have self-interest, and we may not always be getting input from others who are not self-interested. So I just want to caution staff, as you know, there will likely be other changes that have to happen. Those are my general comments. There is one aspect of this that I am not supportive of, and that is to allow a business where smoking is taking place inside. We don't allow that for tobacco-related businesses, in large part because of the concerns for safety of the other patrons, as well as for the employees. And I'm very concerned that if we allow indoor smoking lounges, we are going to force employees who work there to be subjected to secondhand smoke, and other patrons who may be there, presumably they know what they're entering, but we allow smoking in outdoor areas for businesses. We don't allow it indoors. And I would like to hear a little bit of your rationale in making that change and not taking into account the health and safety of other patrons or employees in those businesses.
So there were a couple of rationale behind that. One being that we are requiring high-capacity scrubbers and ventilation systems within the buildings to try to clear out the smoke. One of the other items that was taken into consideration is that if we allow outdoor smoking, we've heard complaints about the smell of cannabis smoke. And outside, it is very difficult to contain the smell of cannabis smoke in locations. It's much easier to do so inside. So one of the reasons that we moved toward indoor smoking was out of concern for neighboring properties, residential areas that abut our commercial areas, so that they're not being exposed to that smoke outdoor, which is very hard to contain. Indoors, it can be contained, and we can have the systems in place that suck up that smoke quickly and try to make it as clean of an environment as we can.
But won't there, number one, be employees there? And number two, won't there be problems if a cannabis business is not in a standalone building? There'll be other tenants in that. How are you going to deal with the impact of that smoke that will go through the ventilation system that presumably serves the entire building?
From experts that we've spoken with, there is the ability to have a ventilation system that will keep it from going into other neighboring businesses in terms of insulation in the walls, other things. It's also a condition within the business license. It's a specific condition within the ordinance that the smell cannot be smelled outside of the location. So if we're having difficulty with a business and that smell is permeating to other locations, I mean, that's a specific item within our ordinance. So we would come in and ask them to remedy that problem. In terms of employees within the business, we're hoping that those systems can mitigate as much of the smoke as possible. But yes, you would have employees within a lounge where there is smoke occurring.
Mayor Pro Tem Duran? Okay, Councilmember Meister.
I was just going to say that I'm okay with the indoor smoking. I think having it on the outside is going to be very difficult to find those locations that aren't going to impact, that aren't, because they cannot be seen from the street. It's going to impact residents behind it. So I'd rather see it inside than outside.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Do you want to take that out of the motion and we can vote on it separately?
Yes, can we vote on that separately? Because the other changes I would support. So can we first vote on whether to allow indoor smoking lounges?
Do you want to make that
Can
motion?
do it the other way? Okay, so thank you. There's a motion to adopt it without, you're the maker, I think Mayor Pro Tem Duran is the maker. So will you sever that section?
Yes.
Okay. And so the motion is to adopt without that section at this point, and there'll be a subsequent motion on that. All those in favor, please push your button. You got that, Yvonne? You understood what we were doing. Now somebody want to make a motion for the section that allows for indoor smoking lounges?
No, you.
So moved.
And specifically, these are the changes made to section 10 of the ordinance.
Okay. That's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor, please indicate by pushing your button. It carries. Great. Thank you, everyone. Any further items? We're done?
I just wanted to congratulate the mayor. I just heard that you participated in a marathon this weekend. And
No, it was only a half.
well,
So-
half marathon is longer than I'm ever going to run. So congratulations. I'm glad it went well for you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? Any other council member comments?
Yes,
Wait a minute.
Wait, sorry.
Can I ask people to please leave quietly? We're not done with the meeting.
So there was a suggestion that we're going to, at the next meeting, have another discussion about our interaction with cannabis applicants. Can't we just read the minutes from the meeting that was two meetings ago? Okay, because I thought I heard the city manager say he would bring back another discussion.
We'll provide clarity.
Please, people.
We'll send a separate email to the council providing the clarity to that, and we'll make sure that during the training process and the application process that we clearly communicate that to the applicants.
I think there was a specific discussion tonight about one particular form of contact, which was campaign contributions during a particular period of time. And I don't know whether we can prohibit that. Mike is shaking his head. Okay. So if there's any further clarification that the city attorney can provide to us, that would be useful. Okay? Thank you. Any further discussion? Now we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.